Ulysses arrived at Snowman's location, but he failed to hit anything. It slid past, leaving behind a deep chasm. Behind it, fireballs exploded afterward, producing bursts one after another. Klein's somewhat stiff figure flashed about thanks to the fire. The King of the North didn't manage to open up a gap from him as the 5 meters was maintained. By the time Ulysses came to a stop, Klein, who was still invisible, suddenly sensed something amiss. A corresponding scene appeared in his mind. He lunged forward as he clung close to the ground and appeared underneath the frost dragon. Meanwhile, Ulysses' thick and powerful tail had swung over, lashing it towards the nearby Xiadas and Mobit. Whoosh! With a loud crack, Mobit was sent flying as he dodged the frost dragon's tail. As for Xiadas, she failed to keep up. Although she had the aid of the gales to retreat and reduce the force, she had been struck in the side. The strike shattered the thick illusory scales that surfaced over her body while her ribs fractured. She was also thrown out, but thanks to the wind, she didn't fall too hard onto the snow. If it were Mobit or Anderson, this strike would have instantly killed them. Thankfully, the storm pathway had the corresponding illusory scales to protect her. Furthermore, every sequence advancement brought about corresponding improvements. Xiadas was only heavily injured, but she didn't lose consciousness. She didn't even completely lose her mobility. At that moment, Ulysses' neck moved as it widened its mouth, spewing out a light blue beam of light. The beam of light swept past Snowman, freezing him into an ice sculpture. Edwina, Franzier, and Anderson were blocked by the huge dragon's body. They couldn't help him in time with the use of their other Beyonder powers because of the distance. Bang! The frost dragon leaped up a little and turned around. When it hit the ground again, it left a slight tremor. At that moment in time, it was clearly in a terrible state. The crack on its right shoulder was abnormally nasty. Although the frozen light blue liquid barely stopped the wound from worsening, its corresponding claw was nearly maimed and could hardly be used. Many of the illusory scales on its body had shattered and abnormally dimmed. It was as though they had lost large amounts of vitality. Regardless, it had severely injured and restrained 3 of its opponents. The situation was much better than before, especially with Groselle being seriously injured. It was no longer caught up in battle and could now attack as it wished. Upon seeing this scene, Edwina's light blue eyes turned black again. Sticky vile thoughts slowly flowed. She suddenly clenched her right palm, causing Ulysses to raise its head in a roar. It was an excruciating pain as light blue liquid flowed from the corner of its eyes and mouth. At that moment, the only thought on the frost dragon's mind was to purge the emotional disturbance from its spirit body. Taking the opportunity, Edwina's eyes lit up and turned extremely pure. The light of dawn around her had quickly materialized into a sword. She wanted to play the role of a guardian to fend off the King of the North. She believed that Gehrman Sparrow definitely had his reasons for staying by Ulysses' side while being invisible. All he needed was time. At that moment, a figure enveloped in the original light of dawn had charged at the frost dragon. It was none other than the giant, Groselle. His chest had sunk in. His grayish-blue skin was pale, and the broadsword in his hand had web-like cracks. However, he still bravely faced his enemy. Groselle cleaved at his target like he was burning up his life, emitting light and warmth. Giants never retreat. Amidst his roar, Groselle parried the frost dragon's repeated blows, and he managed to dodge the ice-blue breath in time due to its maimed front claw. Imprison! Franzier ran over and began to restrict the King of the North's actions. Edwina also worked in tandem with him. Once Ulysses' rage allowed it to escape the restraints, she triggered its emotions again, allowing the restriction to continue and prevent the charge from happening again. At this moment, Anderson switched between throwing burning white spears and fireballs. Again and again, he dealt severe damage to the frost dragon. After Mobit managed to catch his breath, he continued stealing its thoughts or powers, stopping the frost dragon's attacks. Ulysses attempted to spread its wings a second time. It flew into the air a second time, sending snow flying, but with Franzier adding another flight restriction, it could only give up when it sensed the difficulty in doing so. Klein, who kept switching positions by its feet, gained a deeper control of its spirit body threads. It had long reached the 20-second threshold, but he failed to achieve success. This was because the King of the North's spirituality was extremely potent. After a while, there was a clang. Grozel's broadsword was tainted by the frost dragon's breath as he was struck by its claw. The former shattered completely, turning into countless fragments as they flew everywhere. With sputtering sounds, the invisible walls in front of Grozel reached their limit as they let through several fragments that impaled his head and chest. Frunzier, who was similarly nearby, failed to dodge in time. The side of his armor collided with the fragments as his side was mangled. Giants never retreat. Grozel roared loudly once again. The light of dawn radiated from him once again as a sword made of pure light appeared in his palm. As the dark red blood on his face flowed, he parried the frost dragon's strike. At that moment, Klein was flicking the spirit body threads before he finally saw the opportunity to achieve initial control. 3 seconds. 2 seconds. 1 second. Ulysson's actions instantly froze as all its joints seemed to grow rust. The frost dragon immediately became alert and sensed that the source of the danger came from beneath it. Seizing the moment before its thoughts came to a complete halt, it instantly made the decision to sit down. It wanted to quash the despicable fella. Suddenly, its mind went adrift, having forgotten what it wanted to do. And about 20 meters away, Mobit Zorost's knees buckled as he sat strangely on the snow. Klein took the opportunity to move his feet, walking to the side of the frost dragon's hind legs at a decent speed. His invisibility was beginning to wear off. After all, the mimicked ability definitely couldn't compare with the original. He extended his hands halfway as his spirituality jumped, his actions akin to controlling a huge puppet. Bang! Ulysson, whose thoughts were already slowing down, finally recalled what it wanted to do. Its hind legs slowly bent as its hefty figure smashed downwards, but all it did was send snow and dust flying. No. No good. Have to do that. Thoughts flashed through its mind sporadically as its heart suddenly contracted, condensing a terrifying light blue halo. This was the Beyonder power stemming from its life. It could create a cold hell. With this, Klein and company would completely freeze. If not for Snowman's experience and powers being capable of restraining that state, more than 1 or 2 Beyonders would have died. However, with it under Klein's control, everything Ulysson tried to do was clearly impeded. Edwina acutely noticed the source of danger which she previously had no idea about. Immediately, she clenched her right fist, detonating the frost dragon's strong emotions. The King of the North's figure trembled in slow motion as the light blue halo that it had just converged scattered out of control. It failed to interfere with its environment. Ah! The frost dragon's mouth slowly opened as it let out a stuttering cry. Ciata stood up with great difficulty the moment she recovered a little. Upon seeing the situation, she immediately held back her pain and drew her bow. Her hair flared up again as heavy dark clouds appeared in midair once again. 2 different silver bolts of lightning added radiance to each other as they surged onto the bow, forming a terrifying arrow that swirled with a bolt of lightning. Ciatas's face twisted as she released the arrow. The silver bolt of lightning instantly penetrated Ulysson's chest with a whoosh, tearing open a ghastly wound. Flame spewed and lightning bolts sparked inside its wound, causing greater damage. At that moment, Anderson's eyes lit up. A blazing white flame enveloped his body as he transformed into a stream of light, accurately shooting straight for the wound. Pitch-black marks rapidly surfaced on the frost dragon's abdomen as though someone was scribbling over it. Ulysson's thoughts weren't as slow due to the intense stimulation. As it struggled to flap its wings, it soared up into the sky. Flying is prohibited here. Frunzier added more restrictions in a timely manner. Bang! King of the North fell to the ground again as its pitch-black marks on its abdomen tore open. Light blue blood and damaged organs spewed out like a waterfall. Anderson took the opportunity to jump away from the dragon's body. The flames over his body had extinguished as a transparent layer of ice covered him. Cold. It's really cold. He held Death Bracadont as he stiffly jumped away. His body was constantly trembling. Klein, who had nearly allowed the frost dragon to escape his binding, achieved initial control again. He made Ulyssen's thoughts of making everyone present die with it slow down as it suffered from theft and explosions. Its long neck slowly looked up as it let out a slow whimper as its body collapsed bit by bit. During this process, Klein didn't attempt to stop Xiada's and company's continued attacks. He knew very well that to turn the frost dragon into a marionette needed far more than 5 minutes. There were too many accidents that could happen in that span of time. Frunzier stood straight while panting. With the sight of his body mangled, he pushed forward his swordless palm and declared in ancient Hermes, "Death." Ulyssen's body trembled as it collapsed to the ground like a small mountain made of ice. Light blue light that was nearly white was released from its body as its flesh and body quickly disintegrated. Soon, the gigantic dragon corpse turned into a snow-laden heavy door that swung outwards. Without anyone mentioning it, all the Beyonders present knew that it was a door leading to the outside world. Finally. Success. Grozel laughed out loud as his voice grew softer. Thud. His nearly 4-meter-tall figure fell forward as he held himself up with a knee. Following that, the light of dawn around him scattered as his aura was almost immediately gone. Grozel. Xiada's and company went over with great difficulty or great speed. Grozel looked around him slowly, clenching his fist as he gave a good-natured laugh. We succeeded. Giants never retreat. His head with the single vertical eye drooped down when his voice came to a halt. Grozel. Frunzier, who was closest to the giant, rushed to Grozel and caught him. Then, he slowly released his grip and stood up, as though he had just experienced a confusing dream. Xiada's tore out of Mobit's arms, and ignoring the pain all over her body, she ran to Grozel's side with the aid of the wind. She bent down and carefully observed for a moment. Then, she nudged the giant and hysterically shouted, "Wake up! Wake up! It's time for us to leave." Her voice softened into silence. Mobit stood by the side, seeing the giant unable to maintain his body as it wavered. Finally, it fell to the ground with a thud. He fell silent for a few seconds before exhaling. At that moment, Anderson and Edwina had already run to Snowman. One used a flame, while the other mimicked holy light to quickly defrost him. As Klein was nearby, he directly arrived by Grozel's side. His spirit body thread's vision told him that the giant was dead. Only his spirit lingered, but it was beginning to scatter. This made his damage transfer powers completely useless. From the moment Grozel ignited the light of dawn and engaged the frost dragon in a second battle, he must have prepared himself for death. Klein fell silent. Mobit glanced at him and said with a rueful smile, "To be frank, I've not seen many giants. Most of my impression of them had come from books, teachers, and parents. I always thought that this race was cruel and violent, unintelligent creatures who were closer to monsters. However, Grozel wasn't like that. He was frank, honest, and optimistic. Although he might appear rather silly, he knew better than anyone what was right and wrong. He told me that this was because he wasn't one of those ancient giants. He wasn't even a second or third generation giant. The cruel and violent giants similarly had the ability to reproduce and give birth. As for their descendants, there would be more rational ones appearing from time to time. These descendants would reproduce and have more descendants, allowing the entire giant race to escape from the confines of being monsters. I don't know if I should believe him, but his existence has proven the possibility." As Mobit said that, he suddenly paused as though immersed in his memories. At that moment, Edwina and Anderson helped Snowman, whose body was still a little stiff, walk over. The ascetic struggled as he walked to Grozel's side. Looking at the tightly closed single eye, Snowman gestured the sign of the cross on his chest. He half closed his eyes as he whispered a prayer. "Father of all things, the great source of everything, here lies an honest and pure soul. May he enter your kingdom and receive eternal redemption." Xiada's opened her mouth as though she wanted to say that Grozel's faith was in giant King Ormer, but she ultimately chose to keep silent. She watched in silence as Snowman completed the prayer. We have to leave as quickly as possible. No one knows how long this door will remain open, the elvish songster said as she surveyed the surroundings. Her sorrow and pain left her rather quick-tempered. She looked down at the giant and added in a heavy voice, "We can't let Grozel's soul dissipate in this illusory world. We have to bring him back to reality." "All right," Mobit immediately agreed. Klein and company didn't object either. Edwina turned her head and shouted at the mountain cave of ice and snow. "Danitz, you can come out now." At that moment, Ciatas's eyes darted around as though she had recalled something. She turned her head and said to Klein, "Do you have a pen and paper?" "Yes." Klein took out the fountain pen and notes he brought around with him. This was a professional trait of being a seer. Ciatas received it and began scribbling on it. She didn't stop, even when Danitz ran out of the cave. Danitz kept silent. He was also in low spirits as well, lacking the joy and excitement he should have with the pending departure from this book world. Finally, Ciatas stopped writing and handed the paper and pen to Klein. "The formula you wanted. Aren't we completing the trade only after leaving?" Klein mumbled silently in puzzlement. He received the pen and the ocean songster potion formula. As though sensing his puzzlement, Ciatas turned her head and looked at Grozel. She said with a heavy voice, "We are now companions. So you can give me the potion formula directly?" Klein put the items away and nodded indiscernibly. "I'll give you the wine cup after we leave." Ciatas didn't respond. Instead, she nudged Mobit. "Bring Grozel along." Mobit looked down at his body, which wasn't too muscular, and his sharp, curvy leather boots. He gave a bitter smile of helplessness and walked to Grozel's thigh. Frunzier silently followed as he bent down to embrace the giant's left shoulder. Anderson looked around and sked. "All of you are injured or weak. Let me do it." He then lifted up Grozel's other shoulder. Klein was just about to help with the other thigh when Danitz rushed over to take the spot. Upon seeing this, he stopped in his tracks. He then watched Anderson and company lift Grozel as they walked towards the illusory snow-laden door. Klein, Edwina, Ciatas, who stumbled as she walked, and Snowman silently followed beside them before they arrived at the exit formed from Ulysson's corpse. At that moment, Klein surveyed the area and discovered that the light blue blood that flowed out from the King of the North had vanished. It was as though it had never existed. Indeed, it's a conjured monster that's almost real. Klein walked behind as he watched Edwina take a few steps forward as she bent her back, placing her palms on the door. Then, Vice Admiral Iceberg exerted her strength and pushed open the snow-laden door. Silently, everyone saw everything disappear after turning illusory then transparent. Rows of brownish-yellow bookshelves quickly appeared before their eyes, along with the orange-yellow sun which had just set below the horizon and a desk with a fountain pen, ink bottle, and paper. This was Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina's cabin. Klein quickly placed the middle of the table in his sights. Sitting on it was a book filled with yellowish-brown goatskin. The book flipped to the end as a result of a formless wind. Klein and company then saw the epilogue. With the help of the crazy adventurer and the strongest hunter, Grozel fulfilled his promise. He led his teammates and slayed the King of the North, but he also ended up sleeping forever in the Nation of Frost. It didn't even give our ending. Ciatas, where do you plan on heading to next? Mobit released Grozel's thigh as he turned his head to ask the elvish songster. Ciatas's eyes seemed to glaze over for a few seconds before she firmly said, "Seek out my race." Just as she said that, she suddenly saw Mobit's flaxen-colored hair rapidly turn white. His originally smooth face had obvious wrinkles. In just a second, Mobit was dying of old age. Ciatas's heart tightened. Just as she was about to lunge forward, she was surprised to realize that she had lost the strength in her legs at some point in time. With a thud, she fell to the ground and realized that the back of her hands were covered in the aged spots of an elder. She instantly understood what was happening as tears immediately flowed down her face. She struggled as she attempted to crawl towards Mobit. Mobit had similarly slumped to the ground as he crawled towards her while extending his right palm. Ciatas reached out her right palm and grabbed the wrinkled and thin hand. They raised their heads with great difficulty as their pupils reflected one another. The corners of their mouths curled up simultaneously before loosening weakly. Their eyelids drooped down and blocked out the light. Klein, Edwina, Anderson, and Danitz failed to react in time to such changes. They had no idea what they could do as they helplessly watched Grozel's corpse rapidly rot as his flesh and blood evaporated, leaving his skeleton and beyonder characteristic. As for Mobet, Ciadas, Snowman, and Frunzier, they aged in seconds before breathing their last breath and repeating whatever had happened to Grozel's corpse. Their clothes had either disappeared or turned to dust. Their souls dispersed at extraordinary speeds before they were gone. Even the one who lived inside the book for the shortest time had been there for 165 years. Edwina muttered softly as she turned her head to look at that bones which faced the sea and sun. It was none other than disciplinary paladin Frunzier. He was sitting on a chair looking west, where Backland was. Snowman was seated cross-legged to the side. His corpse maintained the posture of praying. That's right. They've lived in the book world for centuries or millennia. With the rules of the outside world, as non-demigods, they should have died long ago. I should have realized this. Why wasn't I wary of this point at all? Could it be? Klein suddenly recalled the psychological influence on Mobet, Grozel, and company as he began having an idea. He once again looked down at the book bound by goatskin. He believed that it had many, many more secrets. This fellow is rather interesting. He died just like that. Anderson looked at Mobet's corpse as he smirked. At that moment, all the beyonder characteristics had slowly condensed. However, Frunzier didn't produce anything similar to that. Edwina observed for a moment before softly saying, the potion he consumed was illusory, likewise for the strength he obtained. It's just like that frost dragon. It was likely conjured in the book world. It was almost real. Klein sighed silently. He was momentarily at a loss for words, so all he could do was maintain Gehrman Sparrow's silence. In the next 10 minutes, no one spoke in the captain's cabin of the Golden Dream until the 4 beyonder characteristics took form. One of them was the size of a fist resembling a heart, it was covered with holes as it shimmered with the light of dawn. Another resembled a jellyfish, its translucent exterior seemed to contain azure-blue seawater, and inside it were vortices that were occasionally stirred by hurricanes or flashing silver lightning while emitting a faint, ethereal song. Another was a pure, bright crystal that exuded holiness. The last was a baby's palm with 5 thin stretched-out fingers as it kept changing colors due to the environment. Sigh, we can't just keep watching like this. Finally, Anderson broke the silence. Let's split the beyonder characteristics. Just as Edwina's light blue eyes were dyed with pangs of fire, the hunter shrugged and said with a wry smile, I believe that they'll have wishes such as this, as we were companions who fought together. Seeing Edwina's gaze warm up, Anderson curled the sides of his mouth and shook his head with a sigh. You're always so inflexible. That's why you aren't able to become an artist your entire life. After sighing again, he looked at the corpse on the chair. We can't keep watching. We have to do something. Doesn't Ciadas wish to find her race? Let's bury her near an elvish ruin in Sonia Island. Mobet looks like he wants to be with Ciadas. We should bury them in the same tomb. Doesn't Frunzier want to return to Backland? Burn his remains to ashes, store the ashes in a box, and bring it to the city when possible. If time permits it, then someone can look for his descendants. As for Snowman, it's not known if he believes in the ancient sun god or the original creator. Who knows if the two are the same? To us, it's the same. There's definitely no way to find the corresponding cathedrals or altars. Therefore, the only thing we can do is bury him beside Grozel. Grozel. He wishes to return to the giant king's court, but that's a city in myths and legends. There's no way to find it in the real world. However, there are giant ruins in the northern and southern continent. We can bury him there and allow him to have a proper burial. Giant King's Court. Backland. Klein listened in silence as he deliberated for a few seconds. Leave the ashes of Grizel, Snowman, and Frunzier with me. He believed that in the time to come, the City of Silver would manage to reach the giant king's court. When that happened, he could hand Grizel's and Snowman's ashes to Little Sun and allow him to bury the two ancient figures. As for Backland, Klein needed to return to it, as it was the final destination of his travels. He could then bring back Frunzier, who had left his hometown for more than 165 years. Edwina added, the Golden Dream often goes to Sonia Island. I'll handle Sonia Islands and Mobit's remains. Alright. You'll be in charge of the cremation later. Anderson turned to look at Danitz as he chuckled and sighed. Look, everyone plays a part in this. There's no need to feel inferior. He originally imagined that Danitz wouldn't understand his consoling and would glare at him angrily. To his surprise, this well-known pirate's expression turned heavy as he nodded in silence. Ahem. As companions who face the King of the North together, let's each choose one. Treat it as though we're inheriting their legacy. Anderson gestured at the shimmering items on the floor. Heh, these Beyonder characteristics definitely have remnants of their psyche. I wonder what kind of influence they will bring. Be it concocting it into a potion for consumption or getting an artisan to craft it into an item, there should be something special about them. The former can be digested with the acting method, but nothing can be done about the latter. Ah, from the looks of it, you don't know the acting method. Treat it as though I didn't say a thing. The last two lines were said to Danitz. Klein didn't have the mood to lampoon Anderson. He looked at the four Beyonder characteristics and said, give Ciodices to me. This was the main ingredient of an ocean songster. Edwina thought for a moment before saying, I'll take Snowman's. It corresponded to the Priest of Light which Klein already had one of. Hence, he didn't choose it. Anderson glanced at the remaining two Beyonder characteristics as his gaze paused at the strange item that resembled a baby's palm. I have to say that this guy is very interesting. Perhaps it can be made into a mystical item that can talk to me. That way, everyone wouldn't be too lonely. At that moment, the giant's heart didn't have an owner. Klein glanced at Danitz and indifferently said, it's yours. Mine? I didn't do anything. I didn't participate in the battle. Danitz was extremely surprised. Klein said simply, you scouted and took on a risk. To Klein, this was a form of compensation. This was because Danitz had chanted the fool's honorific name and knew Gehrman Sparrow's secret. Therefore, he had to force the faith of the fool on him, otherwise, it would only leave latent risks. Although this was a risk which Danitz was willing to take, Klein still wished to compensate him. Of course, he hoped that Danitz would view it as a bestowment from the fool. And regardless of exchanging Grizel's Beyonder characteristic for money, using it to purchase the corresponding formula and ingredients, or making it into a defensive mystical item, all of them would be very useful for Danitz. Take it, Edwina said as she looked at Danitz. All right. Danitz nodded after a few seconds of silence. After distributing them, Klein took a few steps forward and bent his back to pick up Ciodis's Beyonder characteristic. Looking at the azure blue seawater sloshing inside the translucent membrane, he could vaguely hear the elf's beautiful singing. Just as he stood up, he saw Danitz nodding as though he was responding to a question. However, no one had spoken. Klein's gaze swept past Edwina's expressionless face and suspected if this mysticism magister was communicating with Danitz in a way others couldn't hear. Seeing Danitz give an affirmative answer, Edwina reached out to pick up Grizel's travels from the desk and closed it. She then handed it to Klein. This is a token of my gratitude. Without me, all of you would have defeated the Frost Dragon. Klein didn't reach out his hand as he looked at the book comprised of yellowish-brown goatskin. No, we definitely would have died. We had no way to defend against the King of the North's final frenzy. Besides, you were taking a huge risk entering the book. Edwina was like a teacher, explaining to him the reasons in a serious manner. My only request is that you will tell me the answers if you figure out its origins and principles. Klein was very curious about the secrets hidden in Grizel's travels. He couldn't reject the offer as he reached out to take the magical book. Okay. At this moment, the importance of the giant king's court became more obvious. He even thought of buying the black iron key belonging to the giants and was worth £5,000 while he was at it. However, he didn't immediately make the request, to prevent Edwina from thinking that he was trying to fleece her. He prepared to wait a few more hours, or perhaps tomorrow, before borrowing the key from Vice Admiral Iceberg. He would head above the grey fog to divine its worth before offering to purchase it. Seeing Anderson and Danitz pick up their Beyonder characteristics, Edwina glanced at the darkening sky and said to Klein, "Where are you heading to next?" "Buy him," Klein replied frankly. Edwina nodded. "You can head there on the Golden Dream. We have plenty of rooms." Klein nodded indiscernibly as he agreed. Who wouldn't want a free ride? After dealing with the remains and cleaning up the captain's cabin, Edwina walked to the door and opened it. There were gasps of pleasant surprise as the mood in the corridor turned jubilant. "All right, it's fine now." Edwina looked around as a smile formed from her cold expression. The crew cheered loudly, making Anderson stroke his chin and frown. "It's more exaggerated than I imagined." Without a doubt, his words were drowned by the ebullient cheers. After everything came to an end, Klein and Anderson left the captain's cabin under Danitz's lead and headed for other rooms on the same level. Half turning his body to look where they were, Anderson suddenly sighed. "Is that it? Although we didn't get to know each other for more than half an hour, people who fought alongside you often leave a deep impression. But to think they suddenly died in a baffling manner. All of them." Klein was silent for 2 seconds before saying, "This world is filled with baffling deaths to begin with." "That's right." Anderson immediately smiled. "That's why optimism is needed to enjoy life. If I were to face death one day, I'll definitely be composed and cool, not losing my elegance at all. I would face it in the most handsome manner possible. Don't raise flags for yourself." Klein didn't say a word as he entered the room Danitz opened for him. Anderson took the room beside him. In the room, Klein stood at the window as he silently watched the darkening sea for nearly 10 minutes. Then, he entered the bathroom, took 4 steps counterclockwise, recited the incantation, and went above the grey fog. Sitting at the high-backed chair of the fool, he conjured the world's figure and made him make a praying pose. "Honorable Mr. Fool, please inform the sun that I've obtained the sequence 6 notary potion formula he wants. I also have clues to the Priest of Light formula and main ingredients. He can delay payment by putting it on credit and pay for it in the future." Klein was doing this to prepare for his advancement to Sequence 4. The City of Silver had rich resources, so it was possible that particular main ingredients or difficult supplementary ingredients that were hard to come across would exist over there. Therefore, with him in no rush to get anything, he planned on letting Little Sun owe him. The reason why he didn't say that he had obtained the main ingredients and potion formula for Priest of Light was because he felt that it was too exaggerated. He planned on telling him once Little Sun was more or less done digesting the potion. After checking the conjured scene twice, he transmitted it into the crimson star representing the sun as a stream of light. Afternoon town. Having just finished patrolling the periphery of the newly established camp, Derek's vision suddenly blurred, and he saw an endless grey fog and an indistinct figure praying inside a dark red glow. Immediately following that, he heard the world's voice and learned that his notary potion formula had been acquired. Mr. World's efficiency is really high. It's the exact number of days that he promised. Furthermore, he even got clues to the Priest of Light potion formula and main ingredients. Derek felt joy after a moment of alarm. He couldn't help but admire the world, wishing that he would possess similar strength and styles in the future. Above the grey fog, the world made another prayer after Mr. Fool confirmed that there weren't any problems with the Ocean Songster potion formula. "Honorable Mr. Fool, please inform Mr. Hanged Man that I've already obtained the Ocean Songster's potion formula and the corresponding main ingredient. I'll give it to him during the next tarot gathering. Please get him to consider what he would like to provide in exchange." On the undulating sea, inside an ancient and dark sailboat, Alger Wilson stood in front of a window, considering the report he had to produce when he arrived at Pasu Island. It was at that moment when the endless grey fog and a figure lording over him appeared. He then saw a dark red glow and saw a blurry figure resembling the world. He then heard the figure's calm words. After hearing it, Alger's eyes widened. He found it difficult to suppress his joy as a strong sense of bewilderment and shock emerged within his heart. He remembered very clearly that the world had only promised the son to obtain the notary potion formula within 3 days at the last tarot club gathering. He hadn't mentioned anything related to the ocean songster potion formula, but in just days, this gentleman had obtained the rare sequence 5 formula and even its main ingredient. What did he do exactly? Alger muttered silently to himself as he couldn't help but recall Gehrman Sparrow's cold and formidable appearance. He found the man more and more unfathomable. Is this the advantage of being a blessed? Yes, I just received the news yesterday that Gehrman Sparrow boarded the Future last week in Nas. On the one hand, it proves that Admiral of Stars is indeed the hermit, and on the other hand, it means that what the world did last week was extremely important. For example, entering those dangerous waters in the Eastern Front to obtain something. Therefore, he had no choice but to seek the hermit's help. As such, he advanced and became a Sequence 5 powerhouse? This can explain how he obtained the Ocean Songster potion formula and its main ingredient in the span of a few days. But what did he do exactly? Don't tell me that he killed someone from the middle upper echelons of the church? Alger couldn't help but frown. He quickly calmed his heart as he focused on another matter. Although instantly obtaining the formula and main ingredient delighted and excited him, making him feel that becoming a tarot club member was a turning point in his life, he still needed to pay for it. What can I give the world? Alger fell into deep thought, depressed to realize that he didn't have any items or money of equal value. He subconsciously paced about his window. Above the grey fog, the busy world vanished as Klein cast his eyes on Grozel's travels which he had brought above the grey fog. This book, comprised of yellowish-brown goatskin, was silently placed on the long bronze table. It didn't appear special in any way, appearing so ordinary that only history fans would notice it. Klein conjured a pen and paper as he cautiously wrote the first divination statement. This is the spectator pathway's uniqueness. He was most worried about this point, as it meant that he couldn't seal the book above the grey fog. It might bring about unexpected accidents, but carrying it with him made it possible for him to be sucked into the book at any time. That would be very problematic. He undid the spirit pendulum on his left wrist, composed himself, and attempted a divination. When he opened his eyes, the topaz pendant was spinning counterclockwise. It meant a negative result. From the looks of it, this strange book isn't the spectator pathway's uniqueness. Then, there's no need to be too afraid. Klein thought for a few seconds before divining if Grozel's travels was the corresponding item of the spectator pathway's sequence 1 or 2. To his surprise, the divination ended in a failure. He thought for a long while before penning a new divination statement, its origins. The reason why Klein dared to do such a divination was because he knew very well that the spectator pathway's sequence 0 had long perished. There was a high chance that the uniqueness was in the hands of the Twilight Hermit Order. Therefore, the chances of him having to face a real god was negligible. Putting down the pen and holding the paper and book, Klein leaned back into the chair and recited the divination statement as he entered a dream with cogitation. The grey, hazy world cracked open as the sky turned extremely dark. It was as though strong winds were stirring the dark clouds. In this dark environment, a sliver of light appeared first along the horizon as it grew bigger and clearer. It was a floating continent. It was a huge continent that could hold several cities. The continent's periphery was grayish-white in color. Huge boulders revealed their outlines, and above them, there were dozens of erect 100-meter-tall stone columns. They either stood independently or propped up magnificent ancient palaces. Dragons of different colors, grayish-white, scarlet-red, yellowish-bronze, as well as some made of ice, were flying over the continent and the one-of-a-kind city. At times, they would land on a stone column to rest as they overlooked the land. At other times, they would enter the opulent palace and vanish from Klein's sight. Among them, the smallest one was about the size of King of the North Ulyssen. The biggest spanned 100 meters. The scene quickly zoomed in as a palace with a height of over 200 meters occupied Klein's vision. Its interior had stone columns erected, propping up a dome. The space was so large that it allowed any dragon to move freely within. The camera kept moving inward, and soon, Klein saw a book made of yellowish-brown goatskin. Its cover was blank as it floated in midair. Compared to its surroundings, it was amazingly small. Right behind the book, a large shadow appeared. Just as the shadow's silhouette was outlined, Klein felt his thoughts instantly explode. His eyes spewed out with blood as his ears were left with 2 black holes. His mouth and nostrils had white matter stained with blood spew out from them. The mysterious space above the gray fog gently trembled as it pacified everything. Klein quickly recovered as he gritted his teeth and rubbed his head. It hurts. It freaking hurts. It's in no way inferior to the eternal blazing Sunday. I didn't even discern his looks or gain any knowledge. Was he dragon of imagination Ankwelt? According to Little Sun's information, he had perished at the end of the second epoch. After so many epochs, spanning 2 to 3 millennia, just prying into the mystery was enough to put me in such a sorry state. If not for the gray fog screening and assistance, I would have died immediately. This mark is way too powerful, isn't it? There's no way of comparing them. Its damage is inferior to the previous encounter with the eternal blazing sun, but one had died long ago, while the other is still alive. It just begs the question if the ancient gods are stronger than the real gods of the present day. Using nearly a minute to recover from the pain, Klein recast his gaze on Grozel's travels. He tapped the mottled table's edge and muttered silently, "This book's author is Dragon of Imagination Ankwelt? A book written by an ancient god, a storybook that can automatically deduce the ending? What is his goal?" When this book was formed, the Dragon of Imagination likely hadn't encountered the ancient sun god and was fine. After all, it would take some time to go from the City of Miracles, Liveseed, to the Giant King's court. And before Grozel was swallowed by the book, the Giant King's court was clearly still in existence. Just a prank? A toy used to kill his boredom? Or could it be that the Dragon of Imagination had foreseen some of the future? He specially created this book to leave behind a chance for himself or the dragons to resurrect. However, he underestimated the ancient sun god's might, and he completely perished. It made the book unusable for millennia, so all it could do was naturally absorb characters into it to play out a story? Klein made some guesses, but he wasn't able to verify them. After some consideration, he thought of finding a chance to enter the book in search for clues. In the future, I can enter as a spirit body above the gray fog. Once I encounter any trouble, I'll immediately return. Yes, I'll make the attempt after I'm no longer with Edwina and Anderson. I have to be careful and cautious. Klein nodded as he divined if leaving Grozel's travels above the gray fog would bring undesirable changes to the mysterious space, but he was met with failure again. As for the reason, he actually knew why. This was a place that transcended the spirit world. Divining about matters involving this area naturally failed if attempts were made to obtain revelations from the spirit world. After deciding to frequently come above the gray fog to take a look so as to prevent any accidents, Klein threw Grozel's travels into the junk pile. He then waved his hand, summoning a golden wine cup that had been partially flattened. The cup had complicated patterns engraved on it, with the elvish phrases Calamity and Kohinum. Apart from that, there wasn't anything special. With it in hand, Klein silently rubbed it for a few seconds. Knock, knock, knock. Klein politely knocked on the door to the captain's cabin. Is there something? Edwina, who had let down her hair, looked at Gehrman Sparrow and asked. Klein handed over the elf queen's golden wine cup. Put this in Ciatis's tomb. All right. Edwina fell silent for 2 seconds before nodding and receiving it. She habitually studied the engravings and symbols on the cup before withdrawing her gaze in embarrassment. She then looked out the window and said, "They'll be organizing a bonfire party. Will you be participating?" No. Klein shook his head. I understand. I don't plan on participating either. Not everyone is like Anderson, who can quickly raise his spirits, Edwina said with pursed lips. Actually, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Klein was momentarily at a loss for a response. And apart from giving lessons, Edwina wasn't good at socializing. Immediately, the two of them fell silent. About 10 seconds later, Klein silently inhaled and broke the silence. Are you selling that key that originates from the giants? Yes. Edwina thought about it before glancing at her collector's room. She added, I can lend it to you for studying. You can decide whether to buy it before leaving the ship. You didn't even need me to mention it. I was still a little embarrassed to raise the subject. Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief. After considering Gehrman Sparrow's persona, he calmly said, I do not take advantage of others. Just as he said that, he felt a little regretful. He was afraid that Vice Admiral Iceberg would really change her mind. Edwina's light blue eyes moved slightly as she said, the only condition is that you have to tell me the answer to anything you figure out. Phew. Klein didn't harp on the issue as he nodded. Okay. About a minute later, he carried an iron black key the size of a heptacord. And at that moment, there was a series of fervent singing from the deck. Your eyes are so mesmerizing that it feels like the light from dawn. When night comes and the sun has gone down, I almost start feeling melancholy, fervently awaiting your light. Oh, your eyes are so mesmerizing that it feels like the light from dawn. Klein subconsciously went to the window and looked out. He saw that the bonfire had already been lit, and the Golden Dreams crew, that had nothing to do on their hands, were gathered around it. They were either roasting meat or fish as they guzzled beer. Otherwise, they would be dancing a rather random but lively dance alongside singer Orpheus's singing. It was a very merry atmosphere. The oily roasting exuded a tantalizing aroma that wafted upwards. Klein saw that Anderson Hood was also among the pirates, drinking in high spirits and eating happily. From time to time, he would shout a few words and say a joke, as though he was already a member of the Golden Dream. He was no longer ostracized like before. Instead, Danitz didn't appear among them. At the very least, Klein didn't see him near Iron Skin or Barrel. As long as he doesn't provoke others, Anderson is rather good at socializing. This might be the intelligence-gathering powers of a conspirer? Yes, he might have transferred the hatred onto me. I wonder if Danitz will work hard after what happened. If he can improve himself and acquire greater strength, then as the fool, I wouldn't only have myself as a subordinate. I don't have to always appear as a trinity. Haha, this secret existence of mine finally has a real believer, someone I can directly order to do things, even though it's only limited to Danitz. I have to say, it's still quite pathetic. As Klein reflected over the matter, he prepared a ritual to sacrifice the giant's key above the grey fog. At that moment, his spiritual perception was triggered as he instinctively activated his spirit vision and looked to the side. White bones were thrown up as they materialized into the messenger with black flames in its eye sockets. Half of the messenger's body was in the lower deck, so it was nearly level with Gehrman Sparrow without tearing through the ceiling. However, the palm holding the letter remained huge, as though it could easily wrap it around Klein's head. Mr. Azek was quite quick to reply this time. As Klein politely nodded, he received the letter and unfolded it. Just as he was about to read its contents, he suddenly realized that the skeleton messenger remained standing there. It didn't vanish once it delivered the letter. Is there something? Klein asked in surprise. Just as he said that, an idea flashed through his mind as he quickly added, if there's a need to reply, then I will summon you again. The skeleton messenger's huge head nodded as its body collapsed like a waterfall before returning to the underworld. Mamrionette Tinker previously waited for me to give a reply, same for the skeleton messenger this time. Is this some new regulation the messenger world has enacted? Pooey. There's no such thing as a messenger world. They're all individually summoned, and most messengers are just doing it part-time. Yes, the skeleton messenger gave me an aggrieved feeling. Klein shook his head without much thought before focusing his attention on Mr. Azek's letter. To put it simply, attaining godhood begins from the moment one advances to sequence 4. It's a slow process of evolution towards a mythical creature. This process comes to an end at sequence 2. Therefore, there is a qualitative difference between an angel and a saint. In ancient times, the former are even called subsidiary gods. Every demigod, including saints and angels, have their own mythical state. This is a non-human form which is a potpourri of complex knowledge, godhood characteristics, and secret symbols. Ordinary people will suffer tremendous damage from a simple glance, to the point of losing their minds. And as the demigod grows in strength, the damage only grows more potent and irresistible. Therefore, creatures at this level have to constantly control themselves to not expose this form, or just from their very existence alone, it can bring about a catastrophe to their surroundings. To demigods, one of the main traits of losing control is losing reason. When that happens, they will no longer be able to restrain their mythical creature form. However, a saint's mythical form isn't complete. There are clear characteristics of their original race. Strictly speaking, one is a true mythical creature only after they reach sequence 2. I wonder if the blood that Mam Hermit wants is the blood of a mythical creature in the true sense of the phrase, or if the criteria can be relaxed. I wonder if the placenta blood from Will Acceptan's birth counts. He is a sequence 1 snake of fate, an absolute mythical creature, just not in the correct form. I'll accumulate more matters before writing on the paper crane to ask him. Yes, there are only 2 more times, so I need to do it for serious matters. However, I'll be returning to Backland soon. With this in mind, Klein silently calculated when Will Acceptan would be born. He didn't make an accurate recollection, but based on his impressions, Will Acceptan had been conceived last November, and it was currently only the middle of April. Therefore, he will be born in July? Perhaps earlier. Klein thought without great certainty. After all, he didn't have a girlfriend or wife in his previous life, much less having a child. He quickly threw those thoughts to the back of his mind and began setting up the ritual. He sacrificed the giant's key to himself. The reason why he didn't use his spirit body to carry it, it was simply because it was too heavy. Soon, he arrived above the gray fog. He made the iron-black key fly onto the surface of the bronze table as he seriously inspected it a few times. After confirming that there wasn't anything abnormal about it, he conjured a pen and paper and wrote the divination statement, the place this key corresponds to. With the paper in hand and his arm around the key, Klein leaned back into his chair and fell asleep while chanting. This time, the gray, hazy world first presented a distorted translucent screen. As the scene zoomed in, he immediately appeared before a 10-meter-tall door. The door was mainly blue in color and on its sides were various engraved symbols, labels, and patterns. They were stately and mysterious. The light of dusk shone over faintly, dyeing the door with a clear sense of decline. It was like the daylight was gone for the world, with only eternal darkness replacing it. Right on the heels of that, Klein noticed that the opening in the door's left side, at a height of 3 to 4 meters, there was a pitch-black socket which was equivalent to an adult's fist. The scene quickly shattered as Klein opened his eyes. A door similar to the black cloisters but of a different color. The light of dusk. My interpretation is that it represents a particular door of the giant king's court. Yes, the first distorted translucent screen should be the barrier between the forsaken land of the gods and the outside world. Therefore, without the gray mist eliminating interference, there's no way to see the scene via divination. Klein tapped on the edge of the modeled table as he made judgment. He had already decided to buy the giant's key. After going through the hassle of bringing £5,000 in cash back to the real world, Klein tidied the items on the table and held a thick stack of cash. He left his room once again and walked to the captain's cabin. As a desire apostle, Curtius's bounty is equivalent to a key and £1,000. Klein glanced at the cash in his hand as he knocked on Vice Admiral Iceberg's door again. With a creak, Edwina appeared by the door. When she saw him holding the cash, her brows twitched as she widened her eyes. She said with a brightened expression, "You have results?" Klein tersely acknowledged. "I already obtained results that it's likely related to the giant king's court." The giant king's court is spoken in myths? Edwina's eyes lit up as she asked. Klein gently nodded in affirmation. Edwina's lips quivered as though she wished to inquire further, but ultimately, she didn't say a word. She took the £5,000 in cash. She turned back to look at the rows of bookshelves in the captain's cabin and fell silent. She finally said to Klein seconds later, "If you're interested in these books, you can borrow them any time in the day. My only request is..." Klein secretly predicted what Vice Admiral Iceberg was about to say. "My only request is that you can talk to me about history whenever you're free." Edwina paused before she added with her eyes appearing bright. Klein chuckled inwardly and said after some thought, "All right, but I will not answer every question." Meanwhile, he silently prayed inwardly, "Let's hope Vice Admiral Iceberg's collection has methods to create higher-level charms." "No problem." The corner of Edwina's mouth twitched as her expression became livelier. "See you tomorrow." Klein took off his hat and pressed it to his chest as he bowed to bid farewell. Edwina also seriously returned the pleasantries. "See you tomorrow." Backland. Iron Gate Street, outside Braveheart's bar. Emlyn White got off a carriage, pushed open a wooden door, and walked in. He was then triggered by the mixture of smells inside as he pinched his nose in contempt. He hadn't had much progress in the competition to hunt for the primordial moon believers, therefore, he planned on heading to the Braveheart's bar which Sherlock Moriarty often mentioned. He was there to find the rather informed black market arms dealer, Ian. The latter's name was acquired by Emlyn through other means adapted from O Sol Mio. Turning his body to the side, Emlyn avoided a bulldozing drunkard. While swatting his clothes with a frown, he continued jostling towards the bar counter. During this process, he didn't seem to be doing anything, but the surrounding customers would always fail to touch him. Be it in terms of speed, agility, or his balance and coordination, he had reached a rather terrifying level. Finally, Emlyn arrived at the bar counter as he rapped the wooden counter. "Where's Ian?" The bartender glanced at him. Without a word, he kept his head low and wiped his glass cups. Emlyn stood there in surprise, wondering if he had done something wrong that earned him nothing. This angered him a little as he wished to reach out and yank the bartender out. However, he believed that such acts were lacking as a gentleman. He forcefully held down his emotions and looked around and discovered that everyone was drinking. With a thought, Emlyn experimented by saying, "A cup of warmer red wine." The bartender's actions paused as he looked up and gave the handsome, black-haired, red-eyed man an odd look. "We don't have that available." This was the finest red wine in the world. The price was staggering. Emlyn wasn't dumb, and he could tell from the bartender's eyes that he had ordered something he shouldn't have. On careful thought, he said, "1 glass of Southville beer. 5 pence. The bartender finally lowered the cup and cloth. Emlyn took out a 1 solely note and said, "Keep the change." "Thank you." The bartender pointed left and said, "Ian is in card room 1. Emlyn immediately smiled, feeling happy and proud that he had resolved an actual problem. He didn't take the cup of Southville beer and, instead, turned around and walked straight to card room 1. Knock. 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 He politely knocked on the door. "Please come on in." A rather adolescent voice sounded. Emlyn adjusted his collar and pushed open the door, only to realize that the scene inside was unlike what he had expected. He believed that since it was a card room, there would be a bunch of people surrounding a long table, playing games like Texas, but to his surprise, there were indeed about 8 people, but there weren't any poker cards. A piece of paper was placed in front of every participant as they seemed to be recording something. Apart from that, there were only fountain pens and multi-faced dice on the table. Emlyn instinctively cast his gaze on the youngest person inside. It was similarly a handsome boy with red eyes. He looked about 16. "Ian?" Emlyn asked. Ian nodded with a smile. "That's me." "Sir, is there something I can help you with? Or do you wish to join our game?" "Game?" Emlyn returned with a question. Ian chuckled. "Yes, game. I don't enjoy playing cards or billiards, but something needs to be done when spending the whole day here. I gained some inspiration from Emperor Rosel's biography. It's to organize a few people to sit down and attempt a tabletop adventure. In this game, as long as you abide by the rules, you can be anyone: a doctor, an adventurer who loves eating vegetables, a private detective who always carries a wrench and pipe, or an adventurer who enjoys radical ideas. Together, they can head to some ancient castle and seek out the history hidden within, battling all kinds of monsters along the way. Sounds a little interesting. Elland had a feeling that this game suited him well. Haha, do you want to join? We're currently embroiled in a ploy and are facing a powerful ancient vampire. He appears to have a handsome face, but beneath his skin are boils formed from his boiling blood. Ian warmly invited him. Sanguine, thank you very much. Elland's expression twitched indiscernibly as he directly said, I have a mission for you. Alright. Let's go to the room next door. Ian took his round hat and old satchel and stood up. The billiard room next door had no one in it. The boy closed the door with great familiarity as he surveyed the area before looking at Elland. Sir, I do not know you. Might I know who introduced you? Elland lifted his chin and smiled. Sherlock Moriarty. Just as he said that, he suddenly looked left and right as he raised his hand to pinch his nose. So it's Detective Moriarty. Ian heaved a sigh of relief without hiding it. I'm assured then. By the way, didn't he go on vacation to Desi Bay? When will he be back? Elland lowered his right hand as he said without a change in expression, he isn't back yet. I've been to his rented apartment. To be frank, a normal vacation should have ended by the end of January. It's already April. Could it be that something happened to him? Ian asked worriedly. Elland recalled the powers and mysteriousness which Sherlock Moriarty presented as he shook his head. Perhaps he's caught up in a complicated case. Ian didn't speak further as he asked, how may I address you? What mission do you have? You can call me Mr. White. Elland took out a piece of paper that resembled a bounty notice. Help me find these 5 people. Ian received it and carefully flipped through it for a while. £20 for an effective clue, £150 for an exact location. Is that acceptable? No problem. Elland felt that the price was just too cheap. Compared to this, the prices seen at the Tarot Club were way more exaggerated. Ian folded the piece of paper and said, Mr. White, how do I contact you if I have any clues? South of the bridge, Harvest Church. Elland had already thought of the answer. Upon hearing that, Ian gave him an odd look. You're a believer of Mother Earth? That's rare in Backland. I'm not. Elland firmly shook his head. I'm only doing volunteer work over there. Without waiting for Ian to speak, he asked, how did you inherit those red eyes? This was something he had wished to ask when he first saw Ian. This was because red eyes were a trademark characteristic of Sanguine in ancient times. However, there was a long period of time when humans and Sanguine copulated in the 4th epoch. They were all residents of an empire, hence, with the widespread fellowship, many descendants were produced. There was an increasing number of red-eyed mixed bloods as they passed down their genes, becoming an uncommon eye color for humans. To put it simply, every red-eyed human had a Sanguine ancestor. Ian replied in surprise, my father. I've no idea how much further up the family tree, as I was a vagabond. From the looks of it, he isn't connected to the Sanguine. Elland handed over a £20 deposit, feeling somewhat disappointed before turning to leave the billiard room. After he left, Ian didn't immediately return to the card room. Instead, he closed the door and said into the air, Detective Moriarty hasn't returned to Backland. I'm a little worried about him. A figure suddenly appeared in the billiard room. She had a pale face with exquisite features while wearing a black bonnet. Dressed in a black Gothic regal dress, she was none other than Wraith Sharon. He's doing fine, Sharon replied without any perturbation in her tone. Her figure dematerialized before vanishing. You always says the same thing. Don't tell me that you've always been in contact with Detective Moriarty. Ian mumbled softly as he picked up a newspaper in the corner of the billiard room. Placed on it was the Tussock Times, and beneath it was News at Sea. The latter was mainly used to report the situations of the different colonies of the Lone Kingdom and matters at sea, but due to technological restrictions, the news at sea that reached Backland was severely outdated. It wasn't of much use to people who needed it, so subscription numbers were low, and the business was floundering. Later, with a suggestion from a new chief editor, the newspaper's style changed. It had more rumors out at sea, as well as all sorts of strange matters revolving pirates and adventurers. It appeared more like stories, rather than actual news reports. To people's surprise, this change in style was welcomed. As it involved ghosts, specters, sea monsters, and treasures, it became the semi-literate people's prime choice to flaunt their knowledge to the illiterate at the various bars. After all, although the stories seemed fake, they were sufficiently interesting. Ian casually flipped through the newspapers without finding any content of interest. He only had a deep impression on one of the reports in News at Sea. According to our correspondent, on the night of the March 25th, the King of Immortality fleet attacked a ship heading from East Balam to Faceac and plundered all its goods and money. And living up to his title, Slaughterer Curtius finished a bloody massacre. These pirates are really preposterous. Ian shook his head and lowered the newspapers. He returned to the card room and continued his game. Outside the bar, Elland boarded a carriage and leaned onto the carriage wall as he watched the street lamps move past him. He pinched his nose again and silently muttered, "A wraith? This arms dealer sure is resourceful. Not bad." Elland closed his eyes as he felt more hopeful about his entrusted mission. The sunlight shone in from outside, dyeing the captain's cabin golden. Edwina sat on a chair with a book in hand as she looked opposite her. "So, you also believe that the Solomon, Trunsoist, and Tudor empires all coexisted?" "This is a necessary condition for the War of the Four Emperors," Klein simply replied. He held a book titled Book of the Three Worlds. It originated from a Life School of Thought member before it landed in Vice Admiral Iceberg's hands. It described the material world, the spirit world, and the world beyond rationality. It included some information on charms, with rather profound parts. Klein was seriously reading information on this in a bid to better use the Sea God Scepter and the Worm of Time. Klein had actually discovered that the books collected by Vice Admiral Iceberg were various ancient texts that were rather unsystematic. This was quite different from the characteristics of the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom which backed her. Therefore, he guessed that the internal, orthodox, systematic mysticism knowledge of the Church was not public. Edwina was just about to ask again when she suddenly realized the Golden Dream's cruising speed gradually drop. She looked out the window and after a few looks, said crisply, "We've arrived in Byam." "We've reached Byam?" Klein stood up upon hearing that and looked out. He saw the familiar Resistance's private harbor. He didn't show his surprise as he commented calmly, "Faster than I expected." It was 3 hours faster than he had expected. "It's faster than I expected as well." Edwina looked away and agreed with Gehrman Sparrow. "However, these are all unimportant details." Klein lowered his head, pretending as though he was browsing through the rest of the Book of the Three Worlds. He then handed it to Vice Admiral Iceberg. "That marks the end of this discussion." Edwina looked at the book in silence. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She reached for the Book of the Three Worlds and placed it on the table in passing. Following that, she got up and bowed. "I look forward to future discussions with you. Your expertise in ancient history is admirable." If Klein had been acting as himself, he would have said a few words of humility while praising Vice Admiral Iceberg for her breadth of knowledge. Unfortunately, he was the crazy adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow. All he did was nod and say, "We are collaborators." It meant that there would be opportunities in the future. He didn't speak further as he left the captain's cabin and returned to his room. He packed his suitcase with a relaxed mind, waited for the Golden Dream to dock, and then headed straight for the deck. At that moment, there were many crew members gathered on the deck. It included Gourmet Brew Walls, singer Orpheus, and flowery bow-tie Jodson, most of the crew who were upper echelon members of the pirate crew with their heads worth a handsome bounty. They gave sincere smiles as they happily kept waving at Klein. Among them, Beryl and Iron Skin were filled with excitement as they belted out a song for their departing guest. When did I have such a good relationship with them? Klein lampooned as he walked past the pirates until he arrived at the gangway. Anderson Hood was there with his hair combed, his clothes neat and tidy. He said with a laugh, "They probably mean to say goodbye, or should I say, let's hope we don't meet again. Gehrman, do you know how dangerous a situation you were in? You nearly became the public enemy of every crew member." They were so eager to steer the Golden Dream to buy him in 5 minutes. Klein was just about to answer when he saw Danitz jog over with a black cloak draped over him. This fellow has really resolved himself to do better, and he plans to leave the Golden Dream to go at it alone? This is a little incompatible with my plans. Only by being around Vice Admiral Iceberg and the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom would his value as a believer of the Fool be accentuated. However, it doesn't matter. If Danitz can grow stronger, it will be even more meaningful. Klein habitually measured the pros and cons before ignoring his other thoughts. He looked at Danitz in silence and waited for him to speak. Danitz opened his mouth with a serious expression, but nothing came out of it. All he did was give a hollow chuckle and say to Anderson, "Do you have the potion formula for Conspirer?" "Yes," Anderson said with a chuckle. "But I have no plans on selling it to you." Danitz's expression darkened as Anderson continued, unfazed, "What's the point of obtaining the Conspirer potion formula now? Any attempts to advance now will only result in failure. Pal, it's best you redo your acting as a hunter, followed by a provoker, and then a pyromaniac. It's best that you get an artisan to make that giant's heart into a defensive mystical item. Otherwise, I'm afraid you would be killed by others when the time comes. After you're sure about your chances, get the Conspirer potion formula from your captain. She has it. However, I believe that will be the end for you. Conspirer has very high requirements." Danitz's face twitched as he was being mocked, but he remembered every word Anderson told him. This was because the man before him had the title of strongest hunter, who had rich experience on this pathway. Furthermore, he had a vague idea that the key was acting. He suspected that the captain's guidance from before was directed at this, just that it was rather vague. "There will come a day when I'll let you know what a true conspirer is," Danitz stubbornly retorted before looking at Gehrman Sparrow. He cleared his throat as he said without daring to look into his eyes, "I've already made the request with Captain. In the future, I'll be in contact with the Resistance, and I'll often be in Byam. It means you don't wish to leave the Golden Dream, but you will find opportunities to hone yourself? Why does it feel like you're reporting to your boss?" Klein chuckled inwardly as he gave a terse answer. Danitz was instantly relieved as he felt a lot better. If it wasn't because his companions were watching behind him, he would have diligently helped Gehrman Sparrow carry his suitcase and send him all the way to the dock. After watching Gehrman and Anderson leave, he cautiously decided to pray to the Fool every day starting tonight. He wanted to show his devotion to prevent any accidents from happening to him. Inside the Resistance's private harbor, Anderson watched as Gehrman Sparrow circled into another newly built road before walking out of the woods via the shortest distance. "You seem familiar with this place?" "This road wasn't here the last time I was here," Anderson said, partially bored and poignant. "Of course, there are so many people praying to me every day telling me what they've done, and I occasionally give them a response, such as directing them to mend this road." Klein thought smugly but replied with a stoic expression, "Where does your friend stay?" "In a manor in the Byam city outskirts." Anderson sped up his pace as he led the way. An hour later, he brought Klein to a manor. There was an eclectic smell from various spices, mixed with an indescribable ersatz exoticism. After informing the gatekeeper of their intentions, the two didn't wait long before they saw a man of medium-sized build of less than 1.75 meters walk over. By his side were his butler and valet. The man's skin was somewhat sallow, with quite a tan. His contours were gentle, but his eye sockets were much more recessed than most Loanese. To Klein, he could basically determine the man's background. He was a Highlander from the Feyenopotter kingdom. The man was already a little plump, with a rotund, amiable face. He immediately laughed when he saw the strongest hunter. "Anderson, you aren't dead yet?" "I'm waiting to attend your funeral," Anderson replied without standing on ceremony. He then turned sideways to Klein. "Ukva Connor Chris, the doctor of my former team." He didn't introduce Gehrman Sparrow to Ukva and said with a grin, "I brought you business." Ukva instantly understood Anderson and didn't ask in front of his butler and valet. He led the duo towards the main building in the manor. Along the way, Klein saw buildings like windmills, bakery, brewery, and militia training grounds. The entire manor appeared like a miniaturized kingdom. Apart from the lack of a blacksmith, it was completely self-sufficient. Most iron products were cheaper buying them from the city than personally making them. This is the pastoral lifestyle. Klein sighed silently as he followed Ukva into the house and to his study. Ukva didn't call the mistress of the house over, nor did he carry his child to meet Anderson and Klein. Clearly, he didn't wish for them to have any contact with the mysterious world. Hence, after he closed the door, he went straight to the point. "What's the business? Didn't you wish to sell that revolver?" "He has intentions on buying it." Anderson pointed at Klein. "Gehrman Sparrow." "Gehrman Sparrow? The powerful adventurer who easily hunted Wormtongue Mither?" Ukva said in surprise, but he didn't show any fear. Although he had distanced himself from the adventuring lifestyle, he knew that he couldn't be careless. Therefore, while in Byam, he would proactively keep himself informed to prevent trouble from happening. Anderson scoffed when he heard that. "That's old news. This gentleman's achievements include successfully hunting slaughterer Curtius while living to this day." "Curtius? The second mate of the King of Immortality?" Ukva's expression changed. He couldn't hide his horror as he secretly turned wary. "That's right," Anderson said with a self-deprecating smile. "In the pirates' playground, he's the one who's recognized as the strongest hunter." Ukva gulped as he looked at Klein. He couldn't help but smile and say, "I believe you have the ability to buy Death Knell." "Death Knell?" Klein asked with piqued interest, but he didn't show it. "That's the name of the revolver. It has accompanied me for a decade. Sigh, if it's not because it overlaps in functionality with one of my other mystical items, and isn't of much use for me at present, I wouldn't be willing to sell it," Ukva replied with a sigh. At that moment, Anderson sked with laughter. "That wasn't what you said before. You said you preferred farming tools." "A planter." Klein made the corresponding judgment based on Anderson's words and Ukva's expression. Meanwhile, the corresponding potion names flashed through his mind: Sequence 9 Planter, Sequence 8 Doctor with the ancient name Healing Pastor, and Sequence 7 Harvest Priest. It's no wonder Anderson introduced him as his former team's doctor. Klein thought for a moment and said, "Do you know frankly?" "Haha, no. Although I'm from Feyenopotter, my formula and ingredients were obtained by myself, one at a time. I had nothing to do with the Church of Mother Earth. Therefore, I wouldn't dare to return to Feyenopotter. However, I've heard of Frank Lee. He's someone who gives the church quite a headache," Ukva replied frankly. "He's only a Sequence 6 biologist, but he's given such importance by the church. I really do wish to meet him if there's a chance." "No, you won't, you will regret having that thought." Klein could tell from Ukva's answer that he believed in Mother Earth and was likely a powerful Sequence 5 beyonder. By his side, Anderson's face twitched when he heard Ukva. He said with lingering fear, "That guy does give one a headache. In a certain sense, you can call him a devil. His powers and thoughts have exceeded the level of a Sequence 6. Alright, let's not talk about him. Whenever his name pops up, I still remember the milk that was jettisoned." Ukva looked at the duo in puzzlement as he restrained his looks of curiosity. He walked to the table side, opened a drawer, and pulled out an iron-black revolver that looked a little longer than an ordinary revolver. "This is Death Knell," Ukva introduced it solemnly. "Death Knell? Striking the enemy's death knell with every shot?" I like this name. Klein controlled his facial expressions as he went forward without any anticipation or excitement on his face. He reached out to receive the iron-black revolver with a slightly long barrel. He was originally very worried that Ukfa would raise the price if he showed any strong desires for it. This was common in any transaction, but on second thought, with Gehrman Sparrow's reputation, and with Anderson, the strongest hunter of the Fog Sea, as a witness, it was unlikely that Ukfa Khan or Chris would offend him despite possibly being a Sequence 5 Beyonder. After all, he had quite the adventuring circles and had hoped to lead a quiet and settled life. He definitely had reservations that the crazy adventurer might sneak into the manor in the middle of the night despite not flaring up in front of him. Therefore, his attempts to maintain his calm and composed attitude became one of simply maintaining his persona. Realizing that Gehrman Sparrow was seriously inspecting and studying Death Knell, Ukfa gave a detailed introduction. Its powers are rather uniform, to reap the lives of others. There are 3 methods. First is weakness attack. There's no need to meet any conditions. Just directly inject your spirituality and pull the trigger. It will allow you to discover the target's weaknesses from a mysticism angle. In other words, it would be the aspects where defenses are weaker, and it will provide you with the corresponding accuracy, thus, resulting in extraordinarily terrifying damage. The second is lethal attack. You have to cock the hammer before shooting. Its distinguishing feature is that wherever you hit the target, it will be equivalent to an attack on their weak spot. And if you really do strike the true weak spot, it will be capable of dealing a lethal blow to an enemy without overly strong defenses. To targets who are good at defending, 3 shots would be able to resolve the matter. This includes Guardian. Of course, that is under the premise that the 3 lethal blows aren't spread too far apart. It's best not to exceed 5 seconds. The third is slaughtering. On the foundation of a weakness attack, providing more than twice the spirituality on top of that will imbue ordinary bullets with grapeshot effects. Simultaneously, when aimed at a group of enemies, it will result in area of effect damage. To increase the damage, it will need to meet the conditions for lethal attack, as well as provide more than thrice the spirituality. This drain will be quite a burden on the user. It can also be combined with bullets with different characteristics, allowing you to target different kinds of enemies. This sounds like it corresponds to a Sequence 5 Reaper of the Hunter pathway. Klein glanced at Anderson and asked, seemingly in thought, if the target's physical condition reaches that of a Sequence 4 dragon, how many strikes of lethal attack will kill it? Ukfa was taken aback as he shook his head in a daze. I've never met a dragon before. Much less a dragon whose physical condition has reached that of a demigod. Does Gehrman Sparrow plan on using this gun to slay dragons? And a demigod dragon at that? Isn't that way too crazy? Ukfa suddenly felt that the adventurers these days were completely different from the ones he met back when he was active. He didn't even consider the possibility of death. Anderson coughed before clearing his throat. That will depend on your luck. For real, trust me, luck is extremely important. If you encounter a dragon that has been beaten to a state close to death, then 1 shot would be sufficient. Otherwise, I suggest you to run. Yes, it's more important to stay alive. Of course, if the demigod dragon doesn't defend and stays there for you hit it, 5 shots of lethal attack should be enough to kill it. Ukfa looked at Anderson before looking at Gehrman Sparrow. He decided not to pursue the topic as he changed topics. Anderson has told you about the negative effects of Death Knell, right? You will receive a weakness that originally didn't exist, or it will enhance an already existing weakness, making it become more extreme. This effect will be maintained for 6 hours. There was once a time when I became extremely afraid of cats. There was one when I had just hunted a famous pirate, but I ended up going limp in the legs in front of a newborn kitten. I knelt before it, wailing and crying for it to spare me. If you carry it around, the problems aren't great. It will only make you easily thirsty. Just drinking more water and heading to the washroom more often would solve the problem. Why does it feel like the negative effects of an additional weakness will bring me more trouble? However, it is something acceptable. Klein deliberated and said, name your price. £9,000. Anderson should have mentioned it. That's my bottom line. Ukfa looked at death knell in Gehrman Sparrow's hands and said, this is already cheap enough. If it wasn't because I was worried that getting to know more Beyonders would affect my present life, I would have actively promoted it. I'm sure I can sell it for £12,000. Indeed, a mystical item at this level can be sold for sky-high prices if the negative effects aren't too serious when meeting a suitable buyer. Normally speaking, £10,000 to £12,000 is a reasonable price. Although Klein had the intention of bargaining, the price was already low enough that he felt embarrassed to try and take advantage of him. With a terse acknowledgement, he said, I'll give it a run. I'll complete the deal if there aren't any problems. Of course, he didn't really try the gun, as it would give him a weakness for nothing. His method for inspection was to use his spirituality to probe the gun, along with testing for the credibility of Ukfa's words via divination. He did it rather openly, without minding Ukfa's and Anderson's gazes. I'll make confirmation later above the grey fog. However, Ukfa likely doesn't dare to lie to me. He's definitely afraid of a crazy adventurer seeking revenge on him. After all, he has already obtained a settled and quiet life. He has a wife and children. Klein placed death knell on the table, lifted his suitcase, and took out £9,000 from it. The money had been removed from above the grey fog to air it ahead of time. After Ukfa received the money, he did a quick count and confirmed the authenticity of the money. As expected of a recently famous adventurer. Few people can produce £9,000 in cash at once. Even a tycoon doesn't have that much liquidity, he said poignantly as he put away the stacks of cash. I even spent £5,000 to buy a key not long ago. Klein felt his heart suddenly turn empty as he saw the £9,000 enter Ukfa's drawer. I've been out at sea for so long, saving up so much money, but in just moments, it's all gone. Now, I'm left with £2,683 and 6 gold coins. I can't even afford a relatively decent manor. Klein sighed as he took out the ordinary revolver from his underarm holster, removed the bullets inside, and stuffed them into death knell. After Anderson watched the entire transaction, he said with a TSK, Ukfa, you've changed. In the past, you would have checked the authenticity of each note. If you find it troublesome, I can help you. It's totally fine, but I'm worried that Gehrman will shoot you. Ukfa clearly knew the strongest hunter's talent at provocation. He could imagine the scene of Anderson posing in a way that was begging to be beaten, counting each and every note while verifying them against the light in slow motion. Well said. Klein silently praised him. He then stuffed the iron black, long-barreled revolver into his underarm holster. The original revolver was thrown inside the suitcase. Thanks to you, I no longer have to fret over this matter, Ukfa said with a smile as he pointed at the door. I'll get my valet to send you out. Anderson opened his mouth as he chuckled. Ukfa, aren't you going to keep us here for dinner? When you're married with kids, I'll treat you to the best food at the best restaurant, Ukfa said with a smile, completely unfazed by his accusation. Out of the manor, Anderson looked up with squinted eyes. At the sight of the setting sun, he chuckled. Back when I knew Ukfa, he was a doctor who was good at planting all kinds of strange plants on the ship to improve everyone's lives. I thought he would die early on during our adventures, but to my surprise, he was always lucky. He even became a druid later. Why are your poignant words also so deserving of a beating? Klein deliberately said, he does have good luck. As your companion, luck is needed to survive. Anderson turned his head in surprise as he scrutinized Gehrman Sparrow. You know how to mock others? Or have you been infected by me? He wasn't too affected by it as he straightened his clothes, took off his hat, and said with a smile, all right, you've gotten the mystical item you need. If there's nothing else, it's time I embark on my own journey. Don't forget that demigod's mission. Klein succeeded in using a single sentence to crumple Anderson's expression. I already have an urge that compels me to finish that matter as soon as possible. All right, there's no need for goodbyes. Perhaps we might really meet again one day. Anderson gave a self-deprecating laugh, waved the hat in his hand, and turned to head towards another path that left to Byam. As he watched the strongest hunter depart, Klein slowly heaved a sigh. Holding his suitcase, he followed the path he took to get here and headed for Byam under the red evening sky and the shelter of unique palm trees. Inside Byam City. After finding an ordinary inn to stay in, Klein began considering his subsequent plans. I'm finally free. I can attempt to act as a marionettist. I have to figure out the corresponding principles. That's the most pressing issue for now. Yes, marionettist. The focus should be on the marionette. I haven't actually created a marionette and controlled it in battle. I should start from there. This matter can be completed before returning to Backland. Not only do Beyonders have to stay hidden there, making it difficult to encounter one, but no matter what one does, it's easy to get on the bad side of the church or some important figure. I need to be careful. It's not a good place to select and create marionettes. The sea is better. I'll go make my rounds at the bar later. I'll find a pirate who deserves death to give it a try. With this in mind, Klein immediately got up and left his room. As though he was bringing his certificate of deposit to a bank to withdraw the money, he headed for the nearby seaweed bar. Famous pirates often showed up there. Soon, he arrived at the bar's entrance. After straightening his clothes, he pushed open the heavy wooden door. Gazes subconsciously swept past his face before they moved away as though it wasn't anything extraordinary. Following that, someone shouted with a suppressed voice, "Gehrman Sparrow." In a blink of an eye, several figures in the bar ran for the back door. Before Klein could figure out what was happening, the bar was left relatively desolate and empty. As Klein looked at the bar, which was so silent that he could hear breathing, he was taken aback. Only then did he step in and walk straight to the bar counter as though nothing had happened. I should change my appearance the next time I come, he thought in frustration, just short of face-palming. Ukva's lack of awareness that Gehrman Sparrow had successfully hunted Slaughterer Curtius had made Klein believe that the latest news hadn't reached the City of Generosity, and he boldly came to the seaweed bar. To his surprise, the problem lay in Ukva, who had kept a distance from the adventurer circles. He was a little behind on the news, and the crazy adventurer's infamy had already spread amongst the pirates around the Rorstad archipelago. Sighing silently, Klein sat in front of the bar counter and rapped the wooden counter. 1 glass of Southville beer. 6 pence. The bartender gulped his saliva with great difficulty. Klein took out a few copper pence and placed it in front of him. Without a change in expression, he asked, "Any developments recently?" The bartender took the money and carefully delivered the beer to Gehrman Sparrow. Then, he forced a smile and said, "Admiral Emerius Revolt has been transferred back to Backland. Admiral Robert Davis has replaced him, becoming the highest-ranking naval commander of the surrounding waters for the kingdom. The archipelago's situation is a little tense, and many pirate crews have sent people to gather intelligence. Admiral Emerius was ultimately implicated by his brother and lost his post. However, as long as he wasn't directly involved, it can't get worse for him when considering his status as a demigod. At the very least, he can maintain the treatment he receives as an admiral. Nothing will happen to his family either. Once the matter blows over, he might still have a chance of being a high-ranking member of the Navy." Klein gulped down the beer and asked in passing, "Which family is Robert Davis from?" "No, he's not a noble. He's one of the rare officers who slowly rose up the ranks to admiral. In the Berserk Sea, Sonia Island, and East Balam, he has rendered plenty of meritorious services." The bartender recalled the commendations the papers recently had for Admiral Robert Davis. After a pause, he said, "However, I heard that he has received the sponsorship of many nobles." "Yes, with the Imperial Navy, admirals who are from the royal family or aristocrats, or have close ties with them take up at least 80%. The remaining 20% are mainly rear admirals and vice admirals." Klein had long learned of the situation from the documents he received from Emerius Revolt. Compared to this, the army was a lot better. Gehrman Sparrow didn't continue asking as he seemed to focus on his drinking. The bartender then added, "In the past 2 to 3 months, the resistance has been very active. They've been constantly attempting to destroy railways or set up blockades on public roads. They've given the Governor-General's office quite a headache, forcing it to dispatch large numbers of soldiers to maintain a smooth flow of traffic. However, the resistance army seldom clashes with them head-on. I'm aware of that. It's all going according to my plans. In a place where the natives and mixed bloods take up 80%, it's not difficult for the resistance to gather accurate intelligence. Coupled with external sponsors, it wouldn't be hard for them to live on for short periods of time. The reason why they were in a dire situation in the past was all because Calvetua was an irrational sea serpent. It often got them to attack key nodes in a city, fighting head-on with the Lone Kingdom's navy and army. Klein mumbled to himself in delight as he drank another mouthful of beer. He had also warned the resistance to not be overly active. If they forced the Governor-General's office into a corner, the Lone Kingdom might send Sequence 5 Beyonders or even demigods who were good at pursuit and tracking. With the resistance's strength, there was no way they could put up a fight. In the name of Sea God, Klein's instructions were to maintain while slightly improving their present situation and await for the global situation to change. This wasn't too far off. According to the various matters Miss Justice had feedback on, and with the Hanged Man giving insight that affirmed this, it was certain that once the Lone Kingdom was done with its internal reforms and making the original and newly added ironclad warship become its main force in combat, a war against the southern continent's colonies was inevitable. He silently drank his beer until the bartender was done. He then wore his hat, got up, and left the bar, heading straight for his inn. Along the way, he saw bronze-skinned children with curly hair and natives with brown jackets and pantaloons. These people either made way in horror without even looking up, or they were hunched in a corner, looking at Klein with a complicated look in their eyes. Klein helplessly curved the ends of his lips as he silently returned to his room. He didn't immediately change his appearance and head to the various bars to seek out pirates. This was because he was certain that they would hide the entire night and not appear again. Just as Klein was planning to enter Grozel's travels to explore it, there was a knock on his door. Without needing to ask, all he did was grip the knob when the visitor's appearance naturally surfaced in his mind. It was a middle-aged man dressed in a dark red coat and white slacks. He wore a ship-shaped hat. The corners of his eyes and mouth, as well as his forehead, had clear wrinkles. He was none other than the captain of the White Agate, military personnel, just Elland. Impressive. News of me appearing in Byam just spread, and he managed to find where I'm staying. Of course, it's because I didn't attempt to hide myself. I directly used my identification documents to check in. Klein turned the knob and pulled open the door. He politely greeted him, "Good evening." "Good evening. I'm very glad to see you back in Byam." Elland took off his hat and entered the room without any reservations. "Is there something?" Klein pulled a chair over and sat down. Elland sat opposite him and chuckled. "Isn't visiting a friend the most important matter? You're such a smooth talker. Too bad Anderson is gone, or he can learn from you." Klein felt triggered for some reason. He maintained his usual state and looked into Elland's eyes. "All right, you've made your visit." Elland seemed to have expected such a response. He smiled and said, "Do you still remember Donna?" "Of course, she and her brother are adorable. I wonder if they've recovered from the fright I gave them the last time and have given up any curiosity towards the mysterious world." Klein calmly replied, "I don't have amnesia. Forgetting unimportant matters aids our mental health." "Heh, this isn't said by Emperor Roselle." Elland simply explained, "Didn't you tell Donna's father that he should post an advertisement in the Sonia Morning Post for 3 days in a row, asking to buy Demir's special cured meat if he needs your help? He did so recently, but unfortunately, you weren't in Byam or the nearby seas." "What happened after that?" Klein's instincts told him that Donna and her family weren't in serious trouble based on Elland's relaxed attitude. Elland chuckled and said, "I heard your conversation back then, and after discovering the advertisement, I visited them using the address. As you know, Donna is a lovely lady. She reminds me of my daughter. The matter isn't too complicated. Erdi, who's Donna's father, had a bunch of valuable goods plundered by the crazy captain. This plunged him into a terrible economic situation. Although it isn't as bad as going bankrupt, life for him has definitely turned for the worse. That's why he wishes to commission you to get the goods back. I knew you weren't in. Buy him back then, so I had to go through my own channels to help Erdi recoup the goods at a reasonable price. Crazy Captain? Klein first found the title familiar before recalling where he had heard it before. According to red-haired Helene, Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy's delivery of slaves for the Demonist sect was passed off to crazy Captain Connors Victor. The latter appeared to have close connections with many of the slave dealers and merchants in the Lone Kingdom. And this was tied to the truth behind the human disappearances in the colonies, as well as the underlying reason of the Great Smog of Backland. I've always been trying to investigate this matter. Back when I attacked Tracy, that was half the reason, but unfortunately, I didn't succeed. Later, I was busy acting for the digesting of the potion and my search for mermaids, so I temporarily abandoned my investigations. Klein's thoughts raced as he asked without a perturbed look, "Where's Crazy Captain now?" "Erdi has already gotten back his goods," Elland hissed, emphasizing that the matter had been settled. Klein looked at him and repeated, "Where's Connors Victor now?" Elland shook his head in exasperation. "I've no idea, but his subordinates are still in Byam trying to gather intelligence. As you know, Admiral Emerius has returned to Backland, and he's been replaced by Admiral Davis. Many changes are in place, so the pirates need to have a new handle of the latest situation. Therefore, I guess that Connors' ship is docked in the shadows of one of the nearby islands, but that's a guess with no way to confirm." After listening in silence with his hands clasped, Klein said, "Thank you." Elland exhaled and looked out the window as his expression rapidly turned solemn. "I came here today to tell you that you're too eye-catching. The higher-ups are beginning to pay attention to you. A powerhouse that can easily kill Curtius wouldn't be ignored. It's best you stop using this identity for checking in, otherwise, you might face some difficult problems." Klein nodded seriously and said, "All right." He was very grateful for Captain Elland's warning, but he didn't show it on his face. After Elland left, Klein immediately changed his appearance, switched ins, and confirmed that he wasn't tracked by the military. After doing all of that, he began considering the search for crazy Captain Connors Victor. To others, this was an extremely difficult task, but Klein had a trick up his sleeve. It was to use the sea god scepter and communicate with nearby sea creatures. As long as Connors Victor was in the Rorstad Archipelago's waters, there was no way he could hide from Klein. Of course, it was necessary that he had enough time to perform the search. Above the gray fog, Klein extended his hand and summoned the sea god scepter from the junk pile. He began browsing through the countless points of light swirling about the sealed artifact. Every point of light corresponded to a believer's prayer. The glow swirled with ethereal holiness. Soon, Klein did a preliminary screening as he focused on the waters instead of the archipelago. After he had isolated the sea god scepter above the gray fog, he was unable to directly use the divine artifact to sense the surrounding waters and do anything effective. He had to rely on the scenes of his believers' prayers as a foundation before reaching out 5 nautical miles to influence the corresponding undersea creatures. Klein emanated his spirituality and touched one of the specks of light. He saw a native performing his daily prayers in the evening on a fishing boat before docking. As Klein's thoughts changed, the angle of the scene quickly drew higher as more dark clouds and undulating waves appeared in the scene. "There are signs of a storm brewing hours ahead?" "That's right. I did find the atmosphere repressing when I was out. That's why Elland said that crazy Captain Connors' ship is likely to be hiding in the shadows of some island. It was to avoid the storm." Klein tapped the edge of the mottled table as he muttered silently. Having deduced this, it made his search much easier. This was because he didn't need to search the extensive waters, all he needed to do was focus on the different islands around those waters. With a change in thought, a blue gem at the tip of the sea god's scepter in Klein's hand lit up. On the waters which no longer had the fishing boat, the crimson moonlight shone down on the deep blue waves that were slowly rising. Suddenly, splashes silently surged upwards as an exaggerated eye looking up into the sky surfaced. Beneath the eye was a massive silhouette. At the same time, all kinds of fish began surfacing nearby. They took in the indistinct halo that came scattering down, and they circled around before swimming down and headed in different directions. 10 seconds later, the waters in a 5 nautical mile radius returned to its previous state. The deep blue waves rose up to a high height again, awaiting the final eruption. Phew. This is a little draining. Klein raised his left hand to rub his temple. He wasn't only simply commandeering the sea creatures, he had also bestowed them with remnant beyonder spirituality to a certain degree. It allowed them to transmit the scenes they saw by praying after they discovered any docked ships around the island. This wasn't too difficult or complicated for the sea god's scepter, but it was burdensome and draining for the controller, Klein. Then, Klein selected a few praying believers situated on different islands around the archipelago. He then used the same method to command the sea creatures of the region. After doing all of this, he didn't bother throwing the sea god's scepter into the junk pile before returning to the real world. He took off his coat and collapsed into bed. Having expended his spirituality to the limit, he believed that he would fall asleep immediately. Yet, his head began aching, preventing him from opening his eyes or falling asleep. Klein could clearly feel that his skin seemed overly sensitive. Lumps grew over his skin, and hidden beneath them were countless meat tendrils. Indeed, as Mr. Hangman said, if you drain your spirituality to zero for 2 consecutive days, you'll definitely start hearing things and show signs of losing control. My body became a little abnormal just from reaching my limits once despite not even maintaining it for too long. Of course, it's because I've only recently advanced, and I haven't digested much. Furthermore, there's the excess from the potions from the prior sequences. Klein regained his train of thought as he attempted to cogitate the stacked spherical lights so as to calm the fatigue of his body and mind. Having gradually recovered, he finally fell asleep. By the time he woke up, it was in the middle of the night. At that moment, the winds were howling outside. The rain was pouring as the storm had finally unleashed its might after a prolonged period of brewing. And this wasn't a rare situation in Byam. Apart from that, the night was relatively serene. Klein went to the washroom to clear his bowels. Washing his hands and taking 4 steps counterclockwise, he once again appeared above the gray fog. He picked up the sea god's scepter on the end of the long bronze table and began browsing through the scenes from the sea creatures. The scenes were that of ships, all located at different ports, harbors, or the shadows of different islands. Although Klein hadn't seen crazy Captain Connor's Victor, he had previously learned of his traits and the various emblems of his pirate crew. Therefore, he wasn't afraid of failing to identify him. Scenes flashed past as he patiently scrutinized the details of the ships. About 10 minutes later, a look of unconcealed joy appeared in his eyes. He zoomed in on a scene as he pulled the orientation of the scene closer. He had found the suspected ship. The ship was docked at the back of Simeem Island, an island furthest from the Rorstad archipelago. Behind it was a towering cliff with churning waves below it. Its sails and flag had been reefed up, but there was a white skull emblem with an eye patch on the 2 sides of the ship. This was none other than the emblem of the crazy captain's pirate crew. Klein removed the spirit pendulum from his left wrist and made a confirmation with divination. The answer made him rejoice, as it was indeed Connor's Victor's ship. And Crazy Captain only had 1 ship. It's no wonder that despite most adventurers at sea knowing that Crazy Captain is in contact with the kingdom's human traffickers and slave merchants, the Church of Storm's investigations of the colony disappearances didn't point to him. He only has a bounty of 3,300 pounds. The pirate crew only has 1 ship, so it just looks like it's a small business. It's impossible for him to do large-scale human trafficking. What should I do next? Klein first sighed silently before considering his angle of investigation. His first reaction was to summon a massive undersea creature, hitch a ride on something akin to a whale, and head straight for Simeem Island while the storm continued. Then, he could infiltrate and use his powers as a marionettist to control crazy Captain Connor's Victor without causing too much of a stir. But on careful thought, he felt that it was a rash decision. It wasn't a problem dealing with other pirates who weren't at the pirate admiral level, but since crazy Captain Connors Victor was involved with a terrifying matter like the Great Smog of Backland, he had to consider that Connors's normal actions were just a disguise. In consideration of how he might have another identity, with the ship concealing some secrets, there was a high chance that there was a trap that could deal with pirate admirals. Klein might not walk out alive despite being armed to the teeth if he made such a rash infiltration attempt. Should I summon myself and head over with the sea god scepter as a spirit body? This can avoid some accidents, as I can immediately end the summoning if anything goes wrong. However, the sea god scepter is essentially the Beyonder characteristic of a high-sequence Beyonder from the storm pathway. As long as it appears in the real world, it might attract Sea King John Cotman. This will prevent the situation from developing as I expect it to. Klein looked at the storm in the scene as he came up with a preliminary plan. Before that, he conjured a pen and paper and wrote the divination statement, "Dealing with Connors Victor is very dangerous." Picking up the silver chain of the spirit pendulum, Klein reined in his thoughts and focused on the divination. Soon, he opened his eyes to see the topaz pendant turning clockwise at a high frequency and large amplitudes. This meant that dealing with Connors Victor was very dangerous. It's as I expected. Thankfully, I didn't rashly rush over. Klein picked up the sea god scepter and decided on executing the plan he had just thought of. It was to use the prayer scene and strike Connors Victor's ship with the sea god scepter from afar by using the cover of the storm. He would rouse the nest and force out its secret. After grasping the relevant situation, he would end the attacks before Sea King John Cotman sensed the abnormality or arrived at the scene. Klein wouldn't feel disappointed if Connors Victor unfortunately landed in the hands of the Sea King. This was because he would have to think of the means to pass the information to the three churches after he figured out the truth of the Great Smog of Backland. If Crazy Captain successfully escaped, Klein would have pried into his secrets by rousing the nest. He could then subsequently formulate a plan of attack. Phew. Klein slowly exhaled as he watched the ship bob about with the dark crashing waves before raising the sea god scepter high in the air. At the tip of the scepter, the blue gems that circled around it had begun to emit a bright light. Simime Island. Under the towering cliff, dark sea waters were being roused by the surrounding waves as they churned about considerably. On Crazy Captain Connors Victor's ship named the Single-Eyed Skull, a few pirates donned cloaks as they pulled up their hats. The rain pattered down heavily on them as they fought against winds that could lift a child, in order to walk out the cabin and inspect the ship to prevent any accidents from happening. Their cloaks were made of linen, but their surfaces were smeared with an already hardened sticky liquid. The raindrops were unable to permeate through that layer and could only flow down onto the deck. The liquid was Donningsman tree sap, produced from the southern continent's rainforest. It was naturally water-resistant and was quite commonly seen. It was originally rather cheap, but after a research team last year suspected that it had beneficial effects on hair growth, its price skyrocketed. In such weather it's suitable to be inside the Red Theater, drinking liquor, smoking weed, and having women in your arms. A pirate looked out of the shipboard and grumbled. His companion echoed him as he pulled at his cloak's hood. I heard there's a bunch of new arrivals at the Red Theater. I really want to give them a try. How did you learn of that? Another pirate asked in passing. He was met with a chuckle. I heard it from the boss. It's not like you have no idea what Captain's business is? That's why the boss knows plenty of human traffickers. Huh. They prefer to be called slave merchants. Speaking of which, I recall what happened that time. The pirate who spoke at the beginning wore a reminiscent look. Among the goods sent over, there was a young noble lady who had fled from her home. Her skin, figure, looks, tsk, were. I have no idea how to describe it. I still remember her to this day. What a pity that she committed suicide. As they spoke, they suddenly felt their vision brighten as they subconsciously looked up into the sky. Apart from the pattering rain, there was an abnormal silver bolt of lightning that was snaking its way through the dark clouds that hid the crimson moon and stars. Suddenly, a gigantic bolt of lightning that illuminated the surrounding waters smote down, heading straight for the Single-Eyed Skull. Boom! The bolts began to spread out randomly as the wooden ship burst into flames. Deafening thunder echoed in the pirates' ears. Right on the heels of that, silver bolts of lightning struck down like they were brandishing their claws. The tiny sailboat was instantly plunged into a lightning forest. At that moment, the thick lightning bolts that were about to interweave together had suddenly separated. They split apart in violation of the natural laws, and they failed to hit the single-eyed skull. They hung close to the ship's surroundings before striking the pitch-black water, lighting up the surrounding sea as sizzling lightning bolts snaked out in a spectacle. The pirates on the deck suffered from the strike. One of them had been charred black like an overburnt piece of wood. Two collapsed as their bodies convulsed. There really is a problem. Above the gray fog, Klein couldn't help but sigh when he saw the scene of his lightning storm being dispelled. He was certain that this was a power at the level of a demigod. If he had rashly infiltrated the single-eyed skull, even with creeping hunger, death knell, and Grozel's travels, there was no way he could put up an effective resistance against such strange powers. And by then, he wouldn't have the time to pray to himself and respond using the sea god's scepter above the gray fog. Taking a deep breath, Klein made all the blue gems on the tip of the white-boned scepter light up. Around the single-eyed skull, there were two kinds of sounds in the storm. One was piercingly sharp, as though it could prick through one's eardrums and penetrate one's brain. The other was deep, sounding like a beating heart as it struck on one's spirit body. This gave the pirates an extremely uncomfortable experience, with many having the urge to vomit blood. However, this was only the beginning. The sound of splashing water intensified as a dark wave surged up to a height of nearly 10 meters, running opposite the island's cliffside. The wave was like a wall created by a deity as he pushed it toward the single-eyed skull with an invisible hand. This was a tsunami that Klein created. It could already be considered a calamity. The whooshing sound of the wave sounded like explosions as the pirates on board looked at the dark sky outside, the churning clouds, and the massive tsunami. It felt like the apocalypse mentioned in mythical legends had arrived. They lost all will to save themselves. But as they were waiting in despair for the final judgment, a disturbance that didn't abide by logic or scientific laws appeared in the middle of the waves created by the tsunami. An indescribable vortex rapidly took form as it tore through the entire wave, causing the terrifying waves to rapidly collapse as a result. Amidst a rapturous rumble, a secondary wave threw the single-eyed skull up high into the air as the gigantic wave from before dispersed, spraying a portion of its load onto the ship. One of the masts broke, and the ship was in shambles. Even the deck was completely flooded. Whoosh! A strong wind suddenly stirred and swept up the pirates, turning into a hurricane that exceeded its own limits, pushing the airborne single-eyed skull further towards the sea. The ship began to ride the squall as it flew across the sky, covering a distance of several nautical miles without landing in the undulating waters. It was as though it was an airship that continued stably proceeding forward. Klein was amazed at the demigod or sealed artifact of the corresponding level inside the single-eyed skull for nullifying the tsunami. He sighed at his lacking sequence, as he couldn't create the destructive tsunami that Calvetua had previously created, despite stirring the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog. In the meantime, he controlled the hurricane and ensured that the single-eyed skull didn't lose its support and plummet, afraid that it would leave his 5 nautical mile range of influence. At that moment, his goal wasn't to destroy the single-eyed skull, nor was it to capture crazy Captain Connor's Victor, but to force out the demigod or sealed artifact hidden inside the ship. A powerhouse or item at this level was scarce in the world. By seeing their appearance, he would know who they were sooner or later, as well as which organization they belonged to. And this provided the subsequent direction for the investigation regarding the Great Smog of Backland. I hope it's not from the seer pathway, otherwise, who knows if it's his true face or not. However, this is also a good thing. Since I'm investigating the truth of the Great Smog, I'll figure out what Nsangwil is doing, and I'll make preparations for my subsequent revenge. I'll also be able to successfully find the Bizarro Sorcerer potion formula and main ingredients. As Klein silently sighed, he made the gem on the tip of the sea god's scepter emit a pure azure light. With a hum, the single-eyed skull's flight experienced a change. It plummeted like a roar and didn't even manage to glide. Suddenly, it turned very, very light, landing on the sea's surface like a feather caressing a human's face. At that moment, Klein, who had exhausted plenty of spirituality, was just about to muster his remaining strength to create another tsunami when he heard an explosive boom from the scene. It was a terrifying sonic boom. Furthermore, it was different from normal sonic booms, as though it was mixed with the howling sounds of the wind. It was from Sea King John Cotman. Although he was still a distance away, he wielded mastery of these waters, so he could exert his influence across space while he rushed over. This was a Sequence 3 saint who was close to that of an angel. The terrifying sonic boom sent the single-eyed skull flying out. There was no hesitation on whether it would harm anyone. After all, there was nothing wrong with striking down on pirates. Meanwhile, Klein felt a psyche that was so potent that it was terrifying as it swept across the area in search of any spots that appeared abnormal. It caused the scene before his eyes to be affected as everything turned indistinct. After resisting another blast, Klein calmly and rationally ended the response. He shut down the corresponding prayer scene before throwing the sea god scepter into the junk pile. The gap isn't anything trivial. If Sea King didn't appear, I wouldn't have the confidence in forcing out that demigod. My sequence is still too low, giving me troubles when using the scepter, as it's overly burdensome. However, at sea, the storm pathway is really powerful. They're practically mobile calamities. The powers displayed by that demigod had the key elements of distortion, confusion, loaning, and violation of normality. It appears to be the Black Emperor paths of the divine. Others might not realize it, but I have the corresponding card of blasphemy. It definitely isn't only a Sequence 5 mentor of confusion. Account of the Fallen? The military has a portion of the potion formula for the Black Emperor pathway, but it seems to be limited to the first 5 sequences. They lack sequences 4 and above. Although Klein failed to force the demigod or corresponding sealed artifact out, he had gained a certain number of clues from their reaction. He suspected that a particular faction in the royal family wasn't only cooperating with the demonist sect and Ensanguil, but it was also secretly in cahoots with a faction that wielded most of the sequences of the Black Emperor pathway. The descendants of Solomon or Trunsoist? Is King of the Five Seas Nast involved in this? Klein was in serious thought when he heard overlapping prayers in his ear. It broke his train of thought as he instinctively emanated his spirituality and touched the rippling light beside his chair. Then, he saw Danitz. This well-known pirate had his eyes closed as he piously prayed to the fool. Klein took out his pocket watch in a daze and took a few looks at the time to confirm that it was almost 3 in the morning. Is he nuts? Why is he praying in the middle of the night? Does he not want me to sleep? Klein watched carefully in exasperated amusement and discovered that Danitz looked tipsy. There was even faint singing echoing outside. The crew members of the Golden Dream are having another bonfire party? Are they celebrating the departure of Gehrman Sparrow? To think they celebrated all the way into the middle of the night. Klein instantly understood why Danitz was praying at that moment. He took a deep breath as he emanated his will into the halo, saying in a deep voice, "Those who say my name are on my mind." Sea King John Cotman arrived at Simeem Island as he began searching for the abnormal tsunami that had happened here, as well as the ship that belonged to an unknown pirate crew. He was certain that there was a demigod on board that ship. This tall and brawny cardinal of the Church of Storms with thick, dark blue hair, a high-ranking deacon of the mandated Punisher, clenched his fists as the dark clouds in the sky cracked open, sending crimson sunlight scattering across the sea. After identifying the positions of the stars, John Cotman flew in a particular direction. Suddenly, his speed slowed down because he saw a pirate's ship with a flag fluttering with the single-eyed skull emblem. The ship wasn't manned by anyone as it drifted in the wind. Scarlet flames were everywhere on it, along with charred corpses. In the middle of one of the masts, a middle-aged man was tied to it. He wore a triangular hat and a black eye patch. His exposed eye was widened and filled with horror. A wooden pole had impaled him in his chest as blood dyed everything. His life and spirit body had completely dissipated. Situated beyond the storm, the Golden Dream had crimson-red moonlight shine through the thin clouds and onto one of its rooms which was dark and unlit. Danitz was standing beside his bed, motionless. It was as though he had encountered the Beyonder powers resembling Medusa's petrifying gaze. He couldn't help but grind his teeth loudly as his feet indiscernibly trembled. An endless grayish-white fog and an indistinct figure that stood high above everything, saying the awe-inspiring words, "Those who say my name are on my mind," filled his mind. There really was a response. There really was a response. Danitz's lips quivered as he muttered silently to himself. He felt that his calves had gone soft. This was the first time he was receiving a response from a prayer. He was frightened out of his wits. He long knew that the fool was an unknown existence, the figure whom the secret organization backing Gehrman Sparrow believed in, and that he had already made a connection due to chanting his honorific name. If he had any actions of disloyalty or betrayal, he would immediately die a baffling death, but this knowledge stemmed from the knowledge Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina had taught him. He had never encountered similar situations before, and he had never imagined that an unknown existence would respond to him. When the fog, figure, and voice suddenly appeared before his eyes and ears, he learned for the first time that mighty existences would directly respond to their believers. Yes, deep down, Danitz had unknowingly changed the unknown existence into a mighty existence. Just as he recovered from his shock, he hurriedly took a few deep breaths as he attempted to pace about to relieve the remnant horrors in his heart. However, just as he took a stride with his right foot, he discovered that his legs had gone limp. All he could do was collapse onto his bed before barely managing to turn around to sit up. It really is a magnificent existence. It's real. Danitz muttered softly as he came to a clear realization that he had involved himself in something serious. Back in the book world, as he had only chanted the honorific name without discovering any abnormalities, all he felt was fear having known of the possible outcomes. Now, he was facing a hidden danger that finally outlined itself, as well a future he couldn't see clearly. How could he not plunge into an inescapable pit of extreme fear? After an unknown period of time, Danitz exhaled as he consoled himself. It might not be a bad thing. At the very least, Gehrman Sparrow is still living, and he's leading quite a good life. Upon having this thought, he forced a smile. I'm a member of a secret organization, and in the future, a person blessed by a magnificent existence. As his thoughts raced, Danitz decided to pray every morning when he woke up. He believed that no existence would dislike a pious believer. Of course, he would keep in mind the revelation and often pray inwardly. The next morning, Klein woke up normally, having exhausted himself the previous night. He slowly got out of bed and saw that the skies were blue and the ground outside was wet. The entire world seemed to be cleansed by water, making it abnormally fresh. However, the disorderly leaves, broken branches, and all sorts of trash were an indication that it wasn't a peaceful night. After washing up, Klein wore an ordinary Loanese face, ordered a cup of Gurney sap, something that originated from Simeem Island, and a rather heavy choice for breakfast, tiativa, to make up for his previous night's expenditure. As he drank the beverage that resembled lemonade with sugar and milk, he ate the fresh, fragrant meal that mixed mutton and fish together, along with the sweet and slightly sour flavor of the fruit. Klein held up the newspapers provided by the inn with great pleasure as he read through the papers starting with the Sonia Morning Post and News Report. At the end of breakfast, he flipped open Strange Cases, a paper that was rather popular among adventurers, and he saw a striking article headline. Bloody infighting amidst storm. According to sources, there was intense infighting on Crazy Captain Connor's Victor's single-eyed skull. The pirates executed Crazy Captain and killed each other, and reports say that no one survived. All of this evil was concealed by the terrifying storm last night. No one was aware of the conflict until the single-eyed skull was found drifting around Simeem Harbor. The article attached an unclear photo, seemingly captured from the harbor in secret. The photo's single-eyed skull's characteristics stood out at once. It was heavily damaged and many spots were charred black. Only a single mast remained intact, while the middle mast had a figure with a triangular hat pinned to it. It's Connor's Victor. He died just like that? Klein's pupils constricted as he seriously contemplated. It can almost be confirmed that there was a demigod on the ship last night. When he saw that crazy captain was targeted, or was seeking in pursuit, he could only care for himself. Unable to bring Connors with him, he decisively silenced him and destroyed all evidence. Klein, who had plans on continuing his pursuits of crazy captain, felt dejected. He realized that although the trail of clues hadn't been completely cut off, there was little of it left. The only matter he was aware of at that moment was that the demigod likely belonged to the Black Emperor pathway. From the intensity of the storm last night, the single-eyed skull was likely sent to the harbor by Sea King John Cotman so as to do any follow-up investigations. I wonder if they will have any additional findings. Yes, I can get Mr. Hanged Man to keep an eye out for it in the Church of Storms. There's no need to inform him since the tarot gathering will be this afternoon. The world can directly commission him to do so. Klein quickly made up his mind before downing the rest of the gurney sap. Then, he returned to his room and planned to retrieve the radio transceiver which he had placed above the grey fog for an extended period of time to contact Rhodes. He wanted to see if it had any other clues regarding the bizarro sorcerer potion formula. Having left Orvie's East Sea, which was also where the Aurora Order's demigod had previously targeted him, Klein now dared to use items with the grey fog's aura. However, he knew very well that he couldn't do it frequently, and each use couldn't be for too long, otherwise, there was the possibility of the true creator detecting it. Due to this reason and his wariness against Rhodes, he planned on doing whatever he could do himself, and he would seek advice from others if possible. He only planned on playing the question-and-answer game if he was out of options. In the Blue Avenger which was docked at the Resistance's private harbor, Alger planned on getting one last resupply before his return to Pasu Island. After instructing his crew which items to purchase, he changed into local clothing, and he went straight for Byam. After circling a few times, he came to the Cathedral of Waves, planning on reporting to Diocese Bishop Chogo about recent developments. Although he was returning to Pasu Island and reporting his work to the upper echelons of the church, he knew very well who his immediate superior was. He knew that he needed to act appropriately and not make his superior believe that he was skipping the chain of command by directly establishing relations with the upper echelons. Chogo remained hale and hearty as he was very pleased with Alger's proactive reporting. After he heard that, he said with a brisk tone, "There's no need to worry about it. It's just routine reporting. I've already informed His Eminence Cotman that you're devoted to the Lord and are loyal to the Church. You're one of the most trusted captains, and His Eminence Cotman will inform the Council of Cardinals of this." He paused, but without giving Alger any time to speak, he continued, "In addition, there's another mission. Investigate people who are intimately tied to crazy Captain Connors Victor. This is a mission directly issued by His Eminence Cotman. You have to take it seriously." Investigate people related to crazy Captain? Alger was puzzled, but he didn't question it. Instead, he struck his right fist on his left breast and said, "Yes, Your Excellency." The grizzled Chogo nodded and thought for 2 seconds before asking, "Do you know Gehrman Sparrow?" This question sounded like a bolt out of the blue. It left Alger's pupils constricting as he nearly lost control on the spot. Thankfully, he was mentally strong, allowing him to barely maintain his normal state. "I've heard of him. He's been very famous recently. Not only has he hunted Wormtongue Mither and seriously injured Tracy, but he has also boarded Catlia's future." Alger droned on to hide the stirrings in his heart. Chogo made a terse acknowledgement. "You were at sea, so you're a little behind on the news. Gehrman Sparrow killed Curtius at Tosgarter last week and obtained his bounty. Hee, that pirate was indeed a devil, a sequence 5 devil." "Curtius? Agalito's second mate?" Alger asked with very honest emotions. He knew that Curtius was suspected to be a sequence 5, but he didn't know that he was of the devil pathway. And the fact he was both a sequence 5 and a devil meant plenty of things. It meant that he was difficult to kill, which meant that Gehrman Sparrow had very likely killed Curtius during a sudden encounter. This meant that Gehrman Sparrow was already at the pinnacle of sequence 5s. If it wasn't because he was seeking to purchase the sequence 4 potion formula, I might even suspect that he had become a demigod. Alger thought, feeling perturbed. He was alarmed to realize that in a week, the world had obtained the sequence 5 ocean songster potion formula and main ingredient, killed a sequence 5 devil, and might very possibly have a sequence 6 notary potion formula in hand as well. How did he do it? Alger realized that he was feeling a little frightened of the world. Of course, it wasn't something unacceptable for him. This was because he knew that the world was Mr. Fool's blessed representative. And Mr. Fool's blessed clearly wasn't a single person. If one was responsible for the notary potion formula, while another was responsible for the ocean songster, then it was possible that Gehrman Sparrow had only killed Curtius. Although this similarly left one apprehensive, it didn't seem like a fabricated story. Chogo nodded solemnly. Yes, Agalito's lack of reaction implies something. Focus on gathering information about Gehrman Sparrow. All right, Your Excellency. Alger bowed reverently, having already decided to be perfunctory with the mission as much as he could. Inside the inn, Klein placed the radio transceiver on the table. Before long, rushed clacking sounds were heard. Amidst the clacking sounds, the radio transceiver spewed out new illusory paper. On the paper were words composed of Loanese: Great Master, your loyal and humble servant, Aurora Reads, has finally caught up to you. There's no need to be so excited. Oh, the way Aurora Reads speaks is as professional as always. He didn't express his bitterness about not being able to contact me for prolonged periods of time, nor did he question me about why I haven't been looking for it. It directly blamed itself by claiming that it hadn't caught up to me. It makes me feel a little guilty. But, I still need to be wary. Klein was momentarily at a loss for an answer. Aurora Reads didn't wait as it used the radio transceiver to produce an emoticon of carefully peeking out on the illusory paper. Great Master, the ruler above the spirit world, your servant has sensed that you are one step closer to returning to your holy throne, am I right? This fellow has evolved really quickly. He's already using colored text to form a nascent form of emoticons. From Aurora Reads' point of view, I'm a true god taking steps to find myself? That's why, although it can clearly sense that I'm only a sequence 5, it still treats me with respect and is even more humble? Klein understood that the mirror was deliberately asking a question, so he nodded in a frank manner. Yes. You have already answered my question. As an exchange and a rule that I need to overlook, you can raise a question to me. Aurora Reads typed quickly in response before adding a smiley face. Klein didn't hesitate and asked directly, where can the potion formula for Bizarro Sorcerer be found? The illusory paper spat out a long paragraph of complicated symbols before turning into a mirror as it represented a realistic scene. It was a dark cathedral without any natural light source. Inside it was a bunch of squirming things that were all so blurry. It looked as though it was a pencil drawing that had been wiped by an eraser, preventing any exact details to be seen. However, Aurora Reads added a bunch of text at the bottom of the scene. This is Zeradol. In his advancement to Sequence 1, Attendant of Mysteries, he lost control and became a monster. However, Great Master, you have to be careful. He is a very crafty person. Perhaps everything about him is just an act with a purpose. I'm unable to look at him directly, as it will bring me harm. Aside from him, you will be unable to obtain the potion formula from any demigod from the secret order. This is because back then Zeradol would directly provide the high sequence potion to them. And there's almost no way to use any Beyonder methods to reverse divine it. What a detailed answer, and it even gave me the additional knowledge that the sequence 1 corresponding to the seer pathway is Attendant of Mysteries. Does it mean being an angel that serves upon mystery? From the looks of it, the secret order approach can only work by directly facing Zeradol to obtain the potion formula. And I'm not even capable of viewing him directly. It's no wonder the Snake of Fate Will Septon told me to find the crazy Zeradol without mentioning the secret order. Klein was moved by Aurora Reads' attitude. If he didn't feel that he lacked the level and strength to commandeer this sealed artifact, he even planned on truly treating it as his servant. Amidst the clear clicking sounds, another segment of the illusory piece of paper appeared, presenting another scene. It was a towering mountain peak. On it was a swath of dilapidated palaces. Inside it was a gigantic stone chair. Klein was very familiar with this scene. Without a Rhodes's footnote, he knew what it represented. The Antigonus family's treasure hidden at the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range. White paper continued being spat out as a new scene was presented. Just like a movie, it had changes in the camera angle. The first scene that appeared in Klein's eyes was a lofty Gothic-style bell tower and beautiful palaces around it. The former represented the Bell of Order, and the latter represented the Sodila Palace. They were landmark buildings in Backland. The scene changed, and soon, there was a new building on the paper. It was a pure black cathedral with two symmetrical bell towers. The scene of the cathedral's interior grew larger, and soon, it presented the entirety of the interior. It was then fixed at a pair of iron black doors that swung open. The door was abnormally heavy, and on it were 7 dark sacred emblems, as though they were guards of the tenebrous heaven. Cheney's Gate. St. Samuel Cathedral. Klein recognized the familiarly styled door. Based on the architectural style, he confirmed that the cathedral was the church of the Evernight goddess's headquarters of the Backland diocese, St. Samuel Cathedral. White paper was spat out and the scene changed as it plunged deep into the darkness. On an empty bookshelf built from bones, there sat an ancient notebook. It was a black hard-covered book. Klein recognized the notebook at once. It was the Antigonus family's notebook which had caused the death of the original Klein. After going round and round, everything came back full circle. Klein silently observed it for a moment, and after the scenes disappeared did he regain control of his thought processes. Yes, back then, the members of the Aurora Order were able to see the clown potion formula from the notebook. Having been acknowledged by it, the content presented to me will definitely be completely different from before when I flipped through it. It should have the bizarro sorcerer potion formula. It just lacks the ingredients or characteristics. So this notebook has been sealed behind St. Samuel Cathedral's Cheney's Gate all this time. To get it from there, the difficulty in doing so wouldn't be lower than finding Zeradal and facing him directly. Back then, there were high-sequence beyonders involved in the Great Smog of Backland. After I reported the matter to the Backland Diocese's church through Miss Justice, the matter was quickly quelled. This is sufficient enough to prove that the Backland Diocese has plenty of power. They have no lack of demigods or sealed artifacts. Yes, regardless, I'll need to return to Backland first and see if there are any opportunities. In contrast, I'd prefer not to head to the Hornacis mountain range. Reining in his thoughts, Klein looked at the radio transceiver which had turned dark and solemn. Last night, who was the demigod on crazy Captain Connors Victor's ship? Clacking sounds quickly sounded as the illusory paper from before vanished as new ones were spat out. The content on the piece of paper was likewise a realistic scene. On an exquisite brass chandelier, 5 candles of different heights spread their warmth and light. A middle-aged man wearing a triangular hat and black eye patch stood before a cabinet that stored grape wine, champagne, and tequila. He was humbly looking opposite him. Opposite him was a tall figure in a black cloak. Its face was completely hidden beneath the hood. The figure didn't seem to have a real head, only a blob of heavily distorted darkness that was embedded above the neck. Thanks to the portraits from Bounty Notices, Klein recognized the one-eyed man to be crazy Captain Connors. His disheveled and oily hair cascaded down and happened to cover his neck. Opposite him is likely that demigod. But he deliberately disguised himself and did the corresponding anti-divination preparations. For a Rhodes to be able to produce a scene of this level is already impressive enough. Klein wasn't too disappointed. Instead, he carefully memorized the figure's build. More than 1.85 meters tall, but less than 1.9 meters. Rather long arms, and when hanging his hands down, it almost reaches the knees. The broad shoulders prop up the cloak. The feet are faced outwards to a certain degree. As an expert in disguises, Klein believed that when a person disguised himself and prepared a certain level of anti-divination measures, there was a high chance that he wouldn't take note of disguising his build, especially when one's body didn't have any particular traits. Therefore, this can provide a certain amount of clues. This allows Klein to find the person familiar when he sees the target. Very good. It's your turn to ask. After keeping that in mind, Klein stopped scrutinizing the figure as he waited for Rhodes's question with piqued interest. He was curious as to how Rhodes would continue breaking through his image of him. The typing sound slowed down as it seemed to appear hesitant. Bit by bit, the illusory white paper was spat out. Great Master, see, can I say something to you? Yes, Klein answered the question, puzzled. He began to look forward to what Rhodes had to say. The sound of typing hastened as it exuded an obvious sense of warmth. On the illusory paper, a single line appeared, Great Master, happy birthday. This is belated. Your current body was born on March 4, 1327. I originally wanted to wish you a happy birthday at midnight of that day, but I failed to keep up with you. It's a topic that really exceeded my expectations. I even forgot about my own birthday. The corners of Klein's lips twitched as he was at a loss for words. He had received the original Klein's memory fragments and received parts of his emotions. He knew the birthday, but for a person who led a solitary life, why would he remember such things? This fellow is actually the first person to wish me a happy birthday. Benson and Melissa must be feeling more upset today. The interview should have ended in February. I wonder if Benson succeeded in becoming a civil servant. Klein felt poignant as the way he looked at the radio transceiver warmed up. He thought for a moment as he calmly asked, Third question, your origins. The typing sounds paused for 2 seconds before sounding out again. A white piece of paper was spat out as a new scene surfaced. Large amounts of black sticky liquid spewed out from the ground as they spread outwards in a distorted manner. They grew different numbers of arms and legs before becoming strange monsters that charged ahead. During this process, a speck of light was shot out along with the black liquid before landing on a rock, to which it rapidly fused together, turning into a mirror with ancient patterns and black gems adorning its two sides. What kind of strange scene is this? This was how Rhodes was born? What was that speck of light? Where did it originate from? It does seem like a Beyonder characteristic. Klein came up with a preliminary interpretation of the scene. The typing sounds didn't stop as another line appeared, Great Master, do you have any other questions? Taking note of the time, Klein shook his head. No. You have finished answering the questions, and it's time for me to leave. Great Master, the ruler above the spirit world, your loyal and humble servant, Rhodes, looks forward to serving you again and hopes to be able to continue following in your footsteps. By at the end of the illusory piece of paper, a hand-waving emoticon was presented. Inside the quiet room in the inn, the dark and silent radio transceiver instantly returned back to normal as its surroundings stopped being eerie. Klein busily set up the ritual and sacrificed it above the gray fog before having the time to consider the answers he had received. According to the clues provided by Rhodes, and combining the answers from Mr. Azek and Will, Klein had a basic idea on how he should proceed. It wasn't just because he wished to return to Backland for some rest and reorganization, but because he viewed the large city as a main locale that he would spend a long period of time being active in. He wanted to see if he could steal the Antigonus family's notebook from the Church of the Evernight Goddesses St. Samuel Cathedral. If he confirmed that there weren't any solutions, he would attempt to switch to neighboring Beyonder pathways, but if that was impossible, he had no choice but to take the final route, head to the main peak of the Hornaces mountain range. I definitely can't use my identity as Sherlock Moriarty when I'm back in Backland unless I wish to dig out in Sangwil or the royal family faction that's hiding in the darkness. However, when contacting people I'm familiar with or using the resources of the Church of Steam, I can transform back into Sherlock Moriarty. In short, I have to create a new identity. Furthermore, it has to be completely separate from Gehrman Sparrow. I won't directly return to Pritz Harbor this time. I'll make a detour to Desi Bay and make sure that no one can figure out my background. Klein's thoughts raced and he soon came up with a clear train of thought. After determining the next steps of action to take, he planned on drawing some blood and heading above the gray fog to explore Grozel's travels using his spirit body, but in consideration that there was a tarot gathering in the afternoon, he lay back in bed and took the time to rest and relax. The future smoothly cruised through the undulating waves as Admiral of Stars Xianxia stood by the window, watching the scenery that seemed to go on without end. And by the deck, there were Nina's exasperated shouts from time to time. She would be angrily scolding Frank Lee for producing a bunch of fast-growing, beef-flavored mushrooms that enjoyed eating fish. Xianxia sighed silently as she nudged the heavy glasses on her nose bridge. At that moment, her spiritual perception was suddenly triggered as she looked down at her study desk. At some point in time, a few pieces of yellowed paper had appeared there. The Emperor's diary entries. She finally sent a messenger over. Xianxia turned around in delight and picked up the few pieces of paper that were akin to a preliminary probe. By 3 in the afternoon, having memorized the symbols, Xianxia saw the illusory crimson light surge at her like a tide, drowning her within. Under a high dome propped up by stone columns, Xianxia saw similar red beams soar up, transforming into indistinct figures. She didn't look carefully, as she realized that a pair of familiar glasses had naturally appeared over her nose bridge. It was almost a perfect replica of the one from the outside world. Then, she caught Miss Justice elegantly stand up from the corner of her eye. Miss Justice briskly greeted the figure at the seat of honor. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." Audrey was in a good mood recently. After she returned to her family's castle, as an obedient daughter, she helped her mother, Lady Caitlin, resolve some psychological problems that stemmed from her age and physical condition. She received extremely good feedback, allowing her to conclude more of the acting principles for psychiatrist. Amongst them, the most important principle was to help others resolve psychological issues. She suspected that this was the reason why the potion's name was psychiatrist and not psychologist. "Miss Justice is very happy." Klein appeared infected as he nodded with a smile as a response. During this process, he noticed that Mr. Hanged Man appeared to be preoccupied with concerns. He looked like he was hesitating and struggling, having not made up his mind. This means that Mr. Hanged Man is able to buy the Ocean Songster's potion formula and main ingredient, but he will have to pay a huge price. I thought he would request to pay for it in installments. The fool Klein reined in his gaze without any signs of unrest as he surveyed the area. After Miss Justice was done with her greeting, Xianxia looked towards the end of the long bronze table. "Honorable Mr. Fool, I found 3 pages of Roselle's diary. Here it comes. I wonder if the 3 diary pages specially selected by Queen Mystic will be valuable. For instance, providing clues to the card of blasphemy for the seer pathway. This will be able to provide me with another alternative." Klein was filled with anticipation as he calmly and naturally said, "Very good. You can think of a request." "Yes, Mr. Fool." Xianxia replied in an impeccable manner before requesting to conjure the contents of the diary pages. Upon seeing her behavior and thinking about how she acted in the dream, Klein was rather gratified. He felt like a teacher having successfully reformed a student. This is the first time Ma'am Hermit is providing Emperor Roselle's diary entries. With the standards and ability she has showcased, it's impossible for her to have failed to find it in the past. Yes, in the past, she was more of an observer. After being punished by Mr. Fool, she has truly integrated into our tarot club? Together with how Xianxia had performed last week, Audrey made a judgment. Meanwhile, she sensed that Mr. Hanged Man didn't seem normal. He looked like he was anticipating something but was also unable to bring himself to part with something. She was rather intrigued. Klein didn't wait too long before the 3 diary pages were conjured and came into his hands. Derek and the other members instinctively fell silent, so as to not disturb Mr. Fool's reading. February 9th. Today is Bornova's birthday. He's already a healthy, strong, honest, and kind young man. His piousness has won the church's favor. Everyone is congratulating me, saying that Bornova will definitely become a saint. They praise him for how pure and flawless his faith is. I should be very happy, but I can't hide my dismay. I wish that my children can be more human, to have more emotions. I hope that they can be themselves, and not just a believer of a deity. However, almost everyone believes from the bottom of their hearts that Bornova's present state is excellent. Matilda is the same. Likewise for Seal. Most of my noble officials share the same feelings. Only Bernadette shares my point of view. She has told me in private that she believes a person should be more self-centered, as long as they don't harm others. Recalling the words Zeradol had said during Bornova's birth, as well as the premonition I've had after becoming a demigod, my heart is turning heavier. Adorable angel, haha, what an adorable angel. Is this you being wary of me? Is this how you are attempting to control me? No, you can probably never understand the pride inside me. To me, so what if you're a deity? I can replace you. February 11th, contact with Zeradol was fruitless again. Ever since he obtained that Antigonus notebook, the number of times the secret order leader appears has been decreasing. I've no idea what secret he's scheming. Anyway, he will definitely not tell me. February 12th. I made a mystical item very suitable for Bernadette. This can allow her to effectively avoid the hidden sage's nagging, as long as she doesn't proactively pray and seek a response. Yes, this item seems to be able to help saints enter the easternmost front of the Sonia Sea where the battlefield of the gods is. It prevents one from being influenced by the true creator's ravings, and that place likely hides the secret to the forsaken land of God. I was only making a present for my daughter out of fun. To think that it has such powerful effects. Bernadette, your dad is really the best artisan in the world. Best artisan? Does this mean that the Emperor had already reached sequence 2 of the savant pathway when he wrote this diary entry, that he had become an angel? With the god of steam and machinery present, this is the peak an artisan can attain. It's no wonder that Queen Mystic can freely enter and exit the battlefield of the gods. So it's because of a gift from the Emperor. Indeed, a child with parents is like a treasure. Klein felt wistful. In addition, he could sense Emperor Roselle's repressed and angry feelings from the diary entry. He used his comprehension skills that were honed from his previous life to figure out what was written in between the lines. After he became an angel, the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery obstructed him and suppressed him. The God of Steam and Machinery had exerted some influence on his youngest son, Bornova, making him become the most devout believer and appointing him as someone who could become an angel and enter the land of perfection. And this not only made Emperor Roselle submit to the suppression while having misgivings, but this had also stirred thoughts of rebellion in him. The Emperor later became a public enemy of the world because of this rebellion? Klein nodded inwardly. Meanwhile, he noticed a matter regarding Zeradol. He suspected that the miracle invoker only began aiming for sequence 1 after he obtained the Antigonus family's notebook. For this, he planned many things, but something happened during his advancement, turning him into a monster. Of course, just as Erode said, Zeradol might not have lost control. He could be hiding something or plotting something. After quickly scanning through it, Klein flipped the page and looked back. It wasn't continuous, and it was brand new content. October 5th. A few primordial moon believers were caught by the Black Suits organization I established. They failed to complete the corresponding sacrificial ritual. Their behavior has intrigued me, as their strength seems to come directly from the Crimson Moon. Unfortunately, large amounts of data have confirmed that the Crimson Moon is really a satellite that's revolving around our planet. Then, how is it fusing physics and mystery together? With my present strength, it's not impossible to head for the Crimson Moon. At most, it will be troublesome and a little difficult, but it doesn't seem to be necessary. October 17th, I've finally made up my mind. I will attempt to switch to the neighboring mystery prior pathway. Only by doing so can I become a sequence 1. I've always suspected that the hidden sage is only a conceptualized uniqueness. Due to some sort of accident, it became sentient and awakened. Therefore, this pathway's sequence 1 position is likely still empty. 715 Madness in his later years plus, turn off reset. I've long obtained the potion formula of Knowledge Emperor from that most ancient organization. Now, it's time to seek the corresponding ingredients. It might already belong to a particular angel, and it might have fused with an object around it, turning into a warped and evil monster, or a chaotic and terrifying sealed artifact. In short, I have to be careful. It's best that I find a suitable helper. Knowledge Emperor. This sequence 1 potion name is rather interesting. If I hadn't directly seen the blasphemy slate, I would have imagined that it belonged to the reader pathway, making it belong to the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. Even stranger, these two pathways aren't switchable. I once discussed this matter with that mysterious leader and old Mr. Hermes. We basically came to a consensus and believe that the reader pathway represents the omniscient part of omnipotent and omniscient. And the mystery prior savant corresponds to knowledge itself, which is categorized into two aspects. One is more about mystery, while the other is more about reality. When I become a knowledge emperor, Bernadette can stop worrying about the hidden sage's infusion of knowledge. She can also stop being afraid of pursuing knowledge. The emperor eventually switched to the mystery prior pathway? I wonder if he successfully became a knowledge emperor. Perhaps it's because of this that his ties with the Church of Steam completely fractured, making him the public enemy with no one to help him. All he could do was place his hopes on the Twilight Hermit Order. Klein thought poignantly as he came up with possible conjectures. Apart from that, he was rather interested in the Emperor's explanation of how the reader pathway wasn't interchangeable with the mystery prior and savant pathway. He believed that by deepening his understanding of it, he might be able to figure out the rules and rationale behind the interchangeability of Beyonder pathways. To the typical Beyonder, the reader, mystery prior, and savant pathway belong to the knowledge domain. There should be a very strong connection between them, yet the former is different. Reader belongs to the omniscient part of the phrase omnipotent and omniscient. Then, the secret suppliant, which is the shepherd pathway, is the omnipotent part. Then, there must be a certain intersection between the two. For example, being potent as a result of being erudite, and being erudite as a result of being potent. Therefore, they can be interchanged. Starting off from this angle, the storm pathway can be understood as omnipotence in the sea, land, and air domain. The spectator corresponds to the psyche, making it a powerful supplement for storm. Then, why can the sun pathway be interchanged with them? Considering how there was an ancient sun god who was deemed to be omnipotent and omniscient, does this mean that the sun pathway is the foundation that accommodates omnipotent and omniscient? Yes, according to such a thought process, mystery prior and savant are different aspects of knowledge itself. That's why they can be interchanged. Then, how is assassin and hunter differentiated? What about the Evernight, death, and god of combat pathways? In moments, Klein thought of many things, but he didn't have the time or sufficient knowledge to delve deeper into his analysis. All he could do was temporarily throw the corresponding questions to the back of his mind and will the third diary page to the top of the stack. At a cursory glance, Klein suddenly became focused. This was because the diary page was very different from the past ones. It didn't have a date, and the words were spaced apart. Because it was the original copy, the weight placed on the page when the words were penned was obviously out of the ordinary. Klein swept through the page as the contents were reflected in his mind. No. Impossible. How can that happen? If my predictions aren't wrong, I'm not the only one who met with that encounter. No. No. How can that happen? The thing that I saw tells me that everything will be destroyed. Likewise for everything I've created. No. I can't accept such an ending. I have to work hard to save myself. I can't rely on the 7 deities. As long as I ascend to the throne of Sequence 0, only then will I and the things I value be preserved. Should I attempt to pull Mr. Door back into the real world? No. Although he claims to be only a Sequence 1, I believe that he isn't just an ordinary Sequence 1. It's very likely that he will bring unexpected catastrophe upon me. The Chinese words, which were much larger than those on the first 2 pages, had occupied the yellowed piece of paper in a haphazard manner. There wasn't much content, but it left Klein's head throbbing painfully. Back when he was writing this diary entry, Emperor Roselle was very likely a Sequence 1 knowledge emperor. The content he wrote was infused with a potent sense of mystery and was colored with his emotions. This also meant that if Klein had read the contents in the real world, he might very well turn mentally unstable or go mad and lose control on the spot. Thankfully, Ma'am Hermit doesn't know Chinese, otherwise, she would have mutated when she was memorizing the contents. Even if she doesn't understand Chinese, she must have found it especially tiring and draining. If one is exposed to it for extended periods of time, visual and auditory hallucinations can't be avoided. Furthermore, there's a high chance that early signs of losing control will appear. Klein thought, congratulating himself for his good luck. His focus quickly turned back onto the diary entry as a sense of puzzlement surfaced. What did the Emperor see that made him so emotional? His mood was also rather extreme. No, the agitation and rashness, as seen in the words, are a little abnormal. It doesn't match the image of someone who has occupied a high position for extended periods of time. It doesn't match the level of an angel. Even in his final days, he said that after he dies, he didn't care if floods deluge the heavens. He didn't lose his composure or appear that agitated back then. Who influenced him? Or did something corrupt and pollute his thoughts? Also, he mentioned that he's not the only one who met with that encounter. What is he referring to? Transmigration? It's true that he isn't the only one who transmigrated for no baffling reason. There's also me, or even more. As thoughts flashed through his mind, Klein didn't waste any time. He made the 3 diary pages vanish as he smiled at Katlia. Have you thought of the request? Katlia bowed in preparation as she said, I wish to know why Emperor Roselle went mad in his later years. Audrey, who was in the same row as her, blinked. She believed that she had heard wrongly, as she didn't expect Ma'am Hermit to immediately ask such a heavy question. Furthermore, how does she know that Emperor Roselle went mad in his later years? Also, she only handed 3 pages, so how can she ask a question of this magnitude? It doesn't abide by the principle of equivalent exchange. Audrey had many thoughts arise in her mind, but she didn't stop Ma'am Hermit's question. Instead, she waited for Mr. Fool's response with piqued interest and inexplicable excitement. Alger, Elland, and Fur similarly held their breaths. They cast their gaze at the end of the bronze table. Only Derek and the world seemed oblivious. Klein thought and chuckled. First, we need to accept reality. I'm not omniscient, nor am I omnipotent. He had said those words in a relaxed, self-deprecating manner, but the Hermit and company didn't show any signs of unrest. Instead, they appeared even more reverent. To them, it was obvious that Mr. Fool wasn't omnipotent and omniscient. Ignoring their guesses regarding Mr. Fool's state, this hidden existence is honorific. Name didn't have any related descriptions that explained the problem. Furthermore, none of the present true gods and evil gods had honorific names that involved omnipotence and omniscience. After setting their expectations, Klein began to answer the Hermit's question. I also wish to know what Roselle encountered in his later years. At present, it can be confirmed that due to an unknown cause and source of stimulation, Roselle cast his gaze on Sequence 0. He didn't explain what Sequence 0 corresponded to. In the Tarot Club, there were more people who knew of it than those who didn't. Even those who didn't know could have guessed something. Sequence 0. The Emperor wanted to become a god? It's no wonder that it's said that he went mad in his later years. Audrey knew what Sequence 0 meant as she instantly sighed. Likewise for Alger. Katlia clearly knew what Sequence 0 implied. She expressed her gratitude while in thought as she retracted her gaze. Sequence 0. Elland and Furs ruminated over the phrase, as though they had just realized that there was a position above Sequence 1 that belonged to true gods. Derek looked at Mr. Fool with a muddled expression. He didn't understand what was wrong with Emperor Roselle's attempt, someone who had a strong presence in history. In the City of Silver, if anyone had the chance, every resident would wish to become a Sequence 0 true god, so as to create a more sustainable living environment, or to lead everyone out of the Forsaken Land. Klein didn't elaborate as he leaned back into his chair and surveyed the area. You may begin. With that said, he controlled the world to look at Derek before smiling deeply. The notary potion formula you want has been acquired. Thank you, Mr. World. According to the agreement, I will remember the debt and await your request, Derek said sincerely. All right. Klein gave a response by controlling the world before making a show of him requesting Mr. Fool to conjure the formula. Before long, the potion formula was in Little Sun's hands. Derek received it in glee as he ravenously scanned the contents of the goatskin. Sequence 6, Notary. Main ingredients: 1 set of crystallized roots of the Tree of Elders, 5 feathers of a spirit-packed bird. Supplementary ingredients: 100 milliliters of radiant spirit-packed trees juice, 1 golden-rimmed sunflower, 1 white-rimmed sunflower, 5 drops of aqua fern juice. Without waiting for the others to speak, the world looked at Alger and said once more, as you know, I have your ocean songster potion formula and main ingredient. Ah? Audrey and company were momentarily dumbfounded. Catlia couldn't hide her alarm as she looked at the world. She vividly remembered that Gehrman Sparrow had just hunted Slaughterer Curtius a week ago. How did he obtain the ocean songster potion formula and main ingredient? Don't tell me he killed an ocean songster? That would be considered a quasi-high-ranking member in the Church of Storms. It's only been a week. Catlia found this unrealistic. Mr. World has also obtained the potion formula and main ingredient for ocean songster. He's really impressive. Derek moved his gaze from the goatskin in his hand and looked at the gentleman seated at the other end of the long bronze table. In his mind, the world's toughness had reached a whole new level, one that could match the weaker members in the 6-member council. Furs was also similarly astonished as her poignancy grew deeper. She remembered that back when she first joined the Tarot Club, Mr. World gave her the impression that he was gloomy and reserved. Apart from that, nothing stood out. In the subsequent gatherings, he began to show that he was experienced and knowledgeable, as well as possessing rather impressive abilities. At a glance, he was a senior Beyonder who had experienced many things, just second to Mr. Hanged Man amongst the Tarot Club members. This image had already formulated in Furz's mind, but in recent months, Miss Magician was repeatedly surprised by the world. He was first capable of obtaining rather important information, and following that, he sold plenty of Beyonder characteristics in a short span of time. He made her involuntarily suspect if he was a Beyonder assassin who was active in the mysterious world. She feared him from the bottom of her heart, but along with that came happiness. This was because it meant that she could commission Mr. World with certain requests that would be met with high chances of success. When the new member, the Hermit, appeared, Furs even imagined that Mr. World's halo would be blanketed by this powerful lady. But to her surprise, he had snatched the limelight, and blinded everyone with his magnificence. To obtain the Ocean Songster Potion formula, its corresponding main ingredient, and the Notary Potion formula was seemingly impossible by human standards. He really is impressive. I admire this kind of quiet and ordinary person who is actually very capable. Sigh, I wonder when I can become a Viscount. After this hunting competition, the winner will receive a prize that's likely something that will allow a sanguine to become stronger. Emlyn White quickly turned his thoughts back to himself. As Audrey was sighing in amazement, she was puzzled about a matter from before. Why is the impressive Mr. World not searching for Emperor Roselle's diary pages? He's not like Ma'am Hermit. He has already joined the Tarot Club for quite some time, and he doesn't need to observe. It's not like he doesn't have any requests that don't require him to search for Emperor Roselle's diary pages to obtain something from Mr. Fool. Then, why isn't he searching for them? Has he privately submitted them? But why? Imperceptibly, Audrey felt that Mr. World and Mr. Fool had a connection to a certain degree, but she wasn't able to confirm it, as there were just too many possibilities. At this moment, Alger turned to the seat of honor after a few seconds of silence. Honorable Mr. Fool, I wish to communicate privately with the world. Here it comes. Klein nodded with anticipation as he isolated everyone's senses. Alger waited for 2 seconds before turning back to look at the world, Gehrman Sparrow. I will use an unknown primitive island's coordinates in exchange. On the island, there aren't only extinct Beyonder creatures that cannot be found on the northern and southern continent, but there's an ancient ruin of unknown age. Back then. Phew. It was discovered by Kalangos and me. Back then, we lacked the strength to delve deep inside it. However, he discovered certain traces, and he suspected that the ruins hide something extremely important. He believes that the value isn't lower than a card created by Emperor Roselle. My strength is inferior to Kalangos, and I didn't go as deep as he did. I had no idea what he saw, other than guesses about the situation from his remarks. What Mr. Hanged Man said holds plenty of information. From the looks of it, he long knew Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalangos. They had even adventured together and found the primitive island and ancient ruins. And previously, he was also the one who thought of finishing off this pirate admiral while he was away at sea. Mr. Hanged Man isn't an ordinary member of the Church of Storms. His past seems very complicated, and he hides many secrets. Yes, a primitive island's value isn't small. For a secret organization, this can be the foundation to support the growth of its members. Klein controlled the world to appear to be in thought as he attempted to obtain more information from the Hanged Man. With the world not rejecting or agreeing, Alger, who had calmed down, calmly said, "On the island, there are traces of demigod-level beyonder creatures. To you, that should be something valuable. On this point, I can swear on Mr. Fool's name. I guarantee that I'm not lying. After I obtain the Bizarro Sorcerer's Potion formula, I'll have to consider how to obtain the corresponding ingredients. At the level of a demigod, money becomes of little use. Trading gives me the highest chance of obtaining something I need. The location of demigod-level beyonder creatures is important. That ruin is also quite interesting." The world didn't hesitate as he chuckled. "Deal." Alger didn't immediately receive the Ocean Songster Potion formula. Instead, he said, "I have a condition. I wish that on your first exploration of the primitive island, that you will do it with me. With Mr. Fool watching all of this, I believe you won't be concerned that I'll be up to no good." Klein considered it for a moment and made the world nod. "No problem. I will need companions when heading to dangerous places. I hope that you will have the required strength." Alger wasn't angered by the world's tone as he heaved a sigh of relief. "That's why, I wish that your first exploration will be after I advance. Of course, if I were to lose control because of my potion, this agreement will naturally be null and void." "No problem," the world replied without any qualms. Alger didn't harp on the topic. After obtaining Mr. Fool's agreement, he conjured the situation of the primitive island on a goatskin. It's along the periphery of the Rorstad Sea. It's quite a big island, almost the size of Blue Mountain Island. Klein received the goatskin and quickly scanned through it to gain a general understanding of the primitive island. He quickly looked up and said, "I'll hand over the potion formula and main ingredient after the gathering ends." "All right." Having made his choice, Alger no longer had any reservations. When hearing that, he felt upheavals going through his heart, but he appeared even more staid on the surface. After the duo's private conversation came to an end, Katlia retracted her gaze at the world and looked at Furs. "The meteorite crystal has been obtained. 600 pounds for 60 grams. That's fast. Ma'am Hermit is really efficient." Furs felt delighted, but she was also stumped. After last week's gathering, she had already obtained the crystallized blood of a lavo squid. For that, she had paid 600 pounds, leaving her with 230 pounds. Adding the 150 pounds she received this week from her royalties, she was still short of 220 pounds. "I'll first borrow from Zio. She should have that much. After I succeed in advancing, I'll try to earn money as quickly as possible. I have to." Fur silently drew a breath and said, "All right. We will do the transaction tomorrow at this time." The hermit tersely acknowledged and, without wasting any time, looked at Audrey. "The black hunting giant lizard's spinal fluid has been confirmed. 1,800 pounds. There are temporarily no clues for the illusory chime tree's fruit. That's already very good. Better than I expected." "Thank you, Ma'am Hermit." Audrey sincerely thanked her without even minding the price. She recently realized that there was a benefit to establishing the relic search and preservation Foundation. She could use her funds in a more secretive and unnoticeable manner. It made it difficult for her parents to notice. After confirming the two transactions, Katlia surveyed the members as though she was one of them. Any clues to the blood of a mythical creature? Klein immediately controlled the world as he chuckled with a hoarse voice. Are you referring a pure mythical creature? Pure mythical creature? There are impure mythical creatures? Audrey and company were puzzled but interested by what they heard. Katlia was taken aback as she said, a pure one, which means the blood of an angel. One drop is enough. She didn't introduce it in detail back then, because she believed that for the time being such a high-level object wouldn't appear in the Tarot Club unless Mr. Fool was willing to provide her with help. And clearly, Mr. Fool didn't need anyone to explain to him what a mythical creature was. I have certain clues, but I can't guarantee that I can obtain it. Furthermore, it might take another 3 months at least. Klein controlled the world to give the response. The other Tarot Club members fell silent. They never expected the world to have clues to an angel's blood. What can't he accomplish? Audrey, Furs, and company had their impression of Mr. World refreshed again. As for Alger, he suspected that the world would seek Mr. Fool's angel for a drop of blood. After a brief moment of silence, Elland, who suddenly realized that his advancement wasn't necessarily as obvious as the other members, weakly said, "Are there any clues regarding my previous commission?" Furs immediately said, "There are suspected cases. I will continue investigating." Burdened with debt, she was motivated to work. At the end of the trading segment, Derek mentioned his request of buying the crystallized roots of the Tree of Elders. As for the feathers of a spirit-packed bird, the City of Silver had it in their special warehouse. In addition, he also sought to purchase the golden-edged sunflower and other supplementary ingredients. They were commonly seen items in the outside world, but they were lacking in the forsaken land of God. The crystallized roots of the Tree of Elders and the supplementary ingredients aren't difficult to obtain. Elland's attention was caught as he said, "Then, what can you use in exchange?" Back when he provided Miss Justice with the fruit of the Tree of Elders, he had already learned where the crystallized roots were. Derek thought and said, "A beyonder characteristic of a Sequence 5 vampire?" It was quite a commonly seen monster in the depths of the darkness. "Sanguine," Elland said through gritted teeth. "There's no rush. I'll tell you when I've decided what I need." He didn't want an item obtained from a transaction to overlap with the prize of the hunting competition. All right. Having already owed a debt to the world, Derek was relatively at ease. After a moment of silence, Klein rapped the edge of the mottled table to indicate the commencement of the free exchange. 717 The World and Hero Bandi Plus, Turn Off Reset. Inside the ancient palace standing above the grey fog, Alger wasn't in a rush to mention the matter regarding crazy Captain Connor's Victor. He turned his head to look at the sun. "Are you still in Afternoon Town?" Derek nodded honestly. "Yes, we took a very long time to establish a camp. Later, with small teams, we wiped out the remnant monsters, one street at a time, in search of any ancient ruins that might still exist. Although this process is slow, it's sufficiently safe." His answer was extremely detailed, and it gave the impression that Mr. Hanged Man could ask more questions if he wished to know more. Audrey listened with interest as she raised her hand slightly. "With all of you staying in Afternoon Town for so long, what do you rely on for food? Is there any black-faced grass nearby?" She had long heard from Little Sun that the City of Silver relied on the black-faced grass that they grew around the city as their source of sustenance. "We carried a portion of powdered black-faced grass, but the main source of food comes from hunting those monsters. Once the beyonder characteristic is expelled, a large proportion of them can be eaten once we skin them and roast them with fire. However, there's a certain degree of corruption in the meat, which will result in psychological problems. We can't continuously consume the meat, and we will need to spread out the intervals," Derek replied in a serious manner to Miss Justice's question. Audrey recalled the few monsters in the depths of the darkness mentioned by Little Sun, and having terrifying vibes about the dark and eerie area around the City of Silver, she couldn't help but press further, "Wouldn't that be very disgusting?" Furs, who was attentively listening to the other members' conversation, was inspired by this question. She deliberately didn't look at Emlyn as she asked Derek with piqued curiosity, "I remember you mentioning that monsters in the depths of the darkness include vampires. Their bodies run with pus and are extremely ugly. Then, how would you consume vampires after killing them?" Emlyn, who heard the question, forgot to correct her by informing her that sanguine weren't vampires. His expression turned livid as he felt an inexplicable feeling of indescribable horror. Derek was silent for 2 seconds before saying, "There are some monsters that are indeed disgusting, very disgusting. Just like the vampires as mentioned by Miss Magician, but we have no choice. As long as it's edible, we will eat it." His voice gradually turned heavy, as though he once again deeply felt the tragedy that was the curse which enveloped the city of silver. The palace that looked like a giant's residence fell silent once again. Even Emlyn, who wanted to retort Derek, didn't say a word. All he did was curl his lips and retract his arm. A few seconds later, the world broke the silence with a chuckle. "Let's return to the sea. There have been certain matters that require your attention." Crazy Captain Connors Victor's single-eyed skull drifted to a nearby harbor after a storm. The masts were snapped, and there were charred marks. The entire crew, including Connors Victor, died. No one survived. Justice and company didn't know who Crazy Captain was. They weren't too interested in the news, other than being curious as to what caused this destructive naval tragedy. On the other hand, Alger shared completely different thoughts from them. There must be a tremendous secret if the world is paying attention to the matter regarding Crazy Captain. It's no wonder His Eminence Cotman issued such an important command to get the mandated Punisher and captains to investigate the situation. Alger's eyes darted about slightly as he said after some thought, "In Byam, the Church of Storms is actively investigating the people and matters surrounding Crazy Captain Connors Victor." There's no need for me to commission it." Klein chuckled inwardly and got the world to directly ask, "What clues does the Church of Storms possess?" "I have no idea. I'll try my best to understand the situation." Alger frankly shook his head. He believed that the world understood what he was implying, that he wasn't exactly sure, but he would sound out what the church knew. Audrey, who was listening out of curiosity, realized that the matter regarding Crazy Captain wasn't simple. Hence, she asked probingly, "Mr. World, isn't this common infighting among pirates?" Klein was just about to be perfunctory with Miss Justice but without divulging anything further when he suddenly thought of a problem. Behind the great smog of Backland and the disappearances, there might be a particular faction from the royal family. It also included some military personnel. And Miss Justice would lean towards the nobles and royal family, both her emotions and from her standpoint. If there comes a day when I target those bastards who are deserving of death, she might not find it acceptable if I commission a mission to her. She might even fall into a dilemma. Therefore, I should now inject the impression in her that the royal family and military have plenty of bad guys. I would subtly change the direction in which her standpoint and emotions are directed towards. For this, I can bear the burden that some of the information regarding the world is leaked. Klein thought for a moment and made the world say with a relaxed, but mocking tone, "Crazy Captain is related to the disappearance of the colonial slaves which Mr. Hanged Man was previously investigating. The Demoness sect takes the people who are tricked or abducted and hands them over to Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy, and they have them ship the people over to the northern continent's East Seas coast. Then, with Crazy Captain Connors Victor, it completes the last mile. This pirate is intricately tied with many human traffickers and slave merchants in loan. Back when I informed Mr. Hanged Man of the news in January, someone witnessed Balin, who was involved in the disappearance cases, with a MI9 member who is loyal to the royal family. Also, Backland's largest human trafficker, Capim, had guards from the Arbiter pathway. With so many matters compounded together, do you think that Crazy Captain's death is simply a result of pirate infighting? I've always wondered why the person behind all of this needs so many slaves." The connections between the clues were clearly presented before Audrey, Alger, and company. It made them suddenly realize a lot of things. Mr. World left Backland and headed for the sea to seek out clues. He's always been investigating the truth behind the Great Smog and Prince Edisac's death. According to the information he provided, it's clear that the true murderer hasn't been punished. He's still hidden inside the royal family, and there's a portion of the military who are working for him. How despicable. This kind of person should be thrown into hell. How does Mr. World know that the guards around Capim were Beyonders from the Arbiter pathway? Did he fight with them? Audrey's mind raced as she suddenly made the connection. Capim was killed by hero bandit Black Emperor. The latter clearly knew which pathway Capim's guards belonged to. Hero bandit Black Emperor is Mr. Fool's blessed. Mr. World is suspected to have certain connections with Mr. Fool. He has never sought Emperor Rozel's diary pages. Therefore, Mr. World is hero bandit Black Emperor, and he's also Mr. Fool's blessed? He doesn't hand in Emperor Rozel's diary pages because he hands them over in private. Some of his actions from before were to hide his identity as a blessed? This is a test given to him by Mr. Fool? It's really hard to connect Mr. World with hero bandit Black Emperor. The latter feels like a hero. Audrey felt like she had stumbled upon the truth as she began to wonder what kind of person Mr. World, who was also hero bandit Black Emperor, was actually like in real life. Alger and Catlia instantly understood why Gehrman Sparrow had attacked Tracy. This blessed was seeking out the truth behind the Great Smog of Backland. And the truth hidden behind this was something Mr. Fool was interested in. Furs and Emlyn, who lived in Backland, also vaguely sensed something when the world mentioned Capim. After all, hero bandit Black Emperor's legend was rather striking in the recent half a year. He became an important character in many run-of-the-mill novels. Even Furs herself had thought of making him the protagonist in a love story between a hero bandit and a young royal lady. They finally understood why the world had noticed in time that something was brewing in Backland and that a tragedy was about to happen. This was because this gentleman had been tracking the corresponding clues the entire time. From the looks of it, the matter in Backland is far from over. There will likely be another accident in the future. I really wish to flee from this place immediately, but Zio definitely wouldn't want to. I have no way of explaining this to her. Furs suddenly had thoughts of fleeing Backland. Emlyn wasn't too afraid. From his point of view, the Sanguine's important figures were in Backland and were definitely able to provide some protection if a disaster really happened. After 2 seconds of silence, Alger said in a serious manner, "I will try my best to investigate this matter." He had already sensed that the truth behind Crazy Captain's death hid a rather terrifying storm. As such, he was a little apprehensive and afraid, but he also trembled with excitement that he was involved in the most important matter regarding the southern and northern continents. After Catlia heard that, she nodded. "I will also seek out relevant information. If there are more clues provided, perhaps I might be able to help." Klein thought for a moment before letting the world speak frankly. On the night of Crazy Captain's death, a high-sequence Beyonder suspected to be from the Black Emperor pathway appeared on his ship. However, this demigod managed to escape before John Cotman arrived. Black Emperor pathway, demigod. Alger and Catlia ruminated over these phrases as they considered an angle of attack. Audrey and company were astonished that the Tarot Club had discussed the development of demigods to something directly involving demigods. The cases that they were involved in were really increasing in level. As for Derek, he didn't understand a thing. With Crazy Captain's matter coming to pass, Catlia glanced at the world before deliberately mentioning her tidbit. Another incident happened at sea. Last week, the crazy adventurer Gehrman Sparrow hunted the second mate of the King of Immortality, Slaughterer Curtius. He was a Sequence 5 Beyonder. How impressive. Furs, who was only a Sequence 8, sighed from the bottom of her heart. She knew very well what it meant to be a Sequence 5. Yes, he really is a legendary adventurer, Audrey echoed. Emlyn turned agape before he closed his mouth. He felt that he was still a distance away from that level. Alger said without any signs of unrest, "It's because of this that the investigation of Gehrman Sparrow's origins has become an important mission of the various major organizations." "Are you implying that the Church of Storms has gotten you to investigate me?" Klein instantly read in between the lines as he made the world chuckle. I wonder where I can claim this commission? I wish to use some unimportant information in exchange for money. I have some understanding of Gehrman Sparrow. Oh, Mr. World is hinting that he doesn't mind me exchanging what appears to be important but, in reality, is actually meaningless information regarding Gehrman Sparrow in exchange for rewards and trust? The hanged man nodded in enlightenment. The free exchange continued for a while until Derek finished learning this week's list of ancient Hermes terms before everything came to a close. After he watched the bowing Miss Justice and company leave, Klein cast his gaze onto Grozel's travels. Not finding himself overly exhausted, Klein rubbed his temples and beckoned over a tiny metallic bottle from the junk pile. Inside it was a tiny tube of blood that he went through great effort to extract from his vein, and he had long brought it above the gray fog. It was only waiting for the opportunity when Klein would use his spirit body to enter Grozel's travels to explore the book world. After opening the cap, Klein wasn't in a hurry to smear the blood over the book's dark brown cover. Instead, he summoned all the items from the junk pile that he had brought to the mysterious space before the tarot gathering, and he spread them out in front of him. In consideration of how the Black Emperor's form was too eye-catching, and with him not too certain of the exact situation in the book world, Klein decided against bringing the card of blasphemy. Instead, he used Azek's copper whistle to fortify his spirit body to prevent himself from failing to return above the gray fog before being instantly killed by some unknown power. As the ancient and exquisite copper whistle fused into his body, Klein's spirit body swelled up and became more corporeal. Two pitch-black flames flared out from his eye sockets as though they possessed a life of their own. With the help of cogitation, he adjusted his spirituality, converging the iciness that stemmed from the aspect of death within his body. Soon, his eyes returned to normal. This was like an evil spirit taking on an ordinary form to lure prey into its proximity. Right on the heels of that, Klein wore creeping hunger and held death knell while he hid the nightmare beyonder characteristic in his body. The latter was prepared for him to seek out any abnormalities when exploring the dreams of the living entities in the book world. After completing all his preparations, he poured a few drops of blood and smeared it over the cover of Grozel's travels. After a brief wait, his vision turned blurry, as though countless translucent objects were hidden within it. Following that, it turned clear. There were blue skies, white clouds, grayish-brown city walls, and passers-by. This is no longer the land of ice and snow from before, but a city that looks very normal on the surface. Klein stood by the side of the dirt road as he observed the residents of the book world. He discovered that most of them wore linen shirts, a short brown coat, and loose dark-colored trousers. Their overall style was akin to that of the Lone Kingdom centuries ago. He looked down at the format of the tailcoat, starched shirt, and damaged dark red bow tie as he silently changed it all out. Instantly, he was no different from the people around him. He then walked to the city gates in preparation to enter. At that moment, a leather-vested soldier at the gate stopped him. Entrance fees. 1 little. Do I look rich? I don't even know what a little is. Klein mumbled inwardly, amused. He then communicated with him at a spiritual level, successfully transferring the soldier's attention onto a merchant caravan behind him. As a quasi-wraith who could possess anyone and control them, exerting a psychological influence on others was nothing extraordinary. It wasn't a particularly potent ability, but it was extremely useful against ordinary people. When Klein entered the city, he walked through the streets in a seemingly relaxed manner, but he inwardly remained wary. He felt that public hygiene was slightly better than Backland a few years ago. It appeared to have a mature sewage system, preventing the situation of any waste and trash being dumped. I couldn't tell that this is an illusory world inside a book at all. Everyone has spirit body threads. Klein proceeded forward as he observed. Suddenly, he noticed a stone building that was more than 10 meters tall to his side. It only had 2 stories, and the top of the door was about 4 meters tall. Beside the building was a signboard. It was written in a language that was completely different from any of the outside world's languages, but Klein instantly understood what it meant: Pesot Blacksmith Guild. There's a blacksmith guild. This place really hasn't entered the age of steam. Just as Klein was feeling poignant, he saw the door creak open, and out walked a giant with 4 long limbs. The giant's skin was grayish-blue, and his head had the trademark single vertical eye. In his hand was a huge and heavy sledgehammer. He walked across the street with his lips curled. The humans walking past him didn't show any fear, as though it was a common sight. They even greeted the giant. "Good afternoon, Groselle." Groselle. Klein, who was rather face-blind to giants, had his pupils constrict. Only then did he realize the familiarity. He was just about to chase after them when he discovered that the giant had turned into another street, vanishing from his sights. Klein stood on the spot, silently observing the intersection as he came up with a few guesses. "There's another Groselle in the book world?" "No, the ending of the travels is that Groselle died in battle in the Nation of Frost." "This is another story?" Filled with all kinds of questions, Klein wasn't in a rush to find Groselle. He turned and entered a bar by the side of the street. Such places were often the places with the most messy and multifarious information in a city. It aided him in quickly gaining a grasp of the entire situation. The bar's lighting was dim, and the ventilation wasn't the best, making the air appear somewhat turbid. At that moment, there weren't many customers drinking. Most of the people were by the bar counter, chatting happily with each other or the bartender. Klein slowly walked over when his gaze froze. He saw a man wearing a black pointed hat and an asymmetrical coat by the side of the bar counter. He looked pretty handsome with his flaxen-colored hair, deep brown eyes, a high nose, and thin lips. He was none other than the Solomon Empire Viscount, Mobet Zorost. Upon seeing him, Klein recalled the scene of the Dream Stealer's rapid aging before he collapsed onto the ground as he struggled to crawl towards elvish songster Ciadas and grabbed her hand. All of that remained clear as day, as though it had just happened yesterday, yet, Mobet had once again appeared before his eyes. Klein's expression grew heavy as he walked over and sat beside Mobet. He didn't say a word, as he knew that Mobet was one to start a conversation. "Outsider, first time in Passout? I swear I've never met you before." Mobet put down a cup of distilled liquor as he turned his head to the side. "I come from the Nation of Frost." Klein randomly cooked up a story. Mobet immediately laughed loudly. "You're a funny one. This is the Nation of Frost, but of course, that was many years ago. Ever since the King of the North was killed by a bunch of adventurers, no, heroes, this place is no longer plagued by ice and snow. Everyone believes that it should be called the Nation of Neverwinter." Klein fell silent without responding. "Why so serious? It looks like you have your own troubles." Mobet rapped on the wooden bar counter, showing signs of sympathy. He downed a mouthful of spirits and said, "I'm telling you. Men should absolutely not get married. It's the beginning of suffering. Do you know? When she gets worked up a little, she would beat me up. When she's happy, she beats me up. Same when she's embarrassed or angry. Anyway, she beats me up for any reason. From this very moment, I've decided not to return home again." "Does this mean you got married to Ciadas?" Klein kept silent for 2 seconds as he sized up Mobet's face. He discovered that there were no signs of bruises and swelling on his face. This meant that the elvish songster knew that men needed to put on appearances. He asked with a sigh, "Then why did you marry her?" Mobet was taken aback as he smiled wryly. "I came here with a merchant caravan. When I first saw her, she was just that beautiful. Her singing was moving and seemed to hide indescribable sorrow. I'm as afraid of her now as I was infatuated over her back then. I definitely won't return." "Hey, why do you seem a little sad?" "You don't have to be sad for me. I'm already free." At that moment, the door to the bar suddenly opened as a beautiful female voice shouted, "Mobet, come out here. I'm counting from 10. Never come back if you don't come home. 10, 9. Mobet immediately jumped up and ran to the door. As he ran, he muttered, "I know you don't have any patience. You always jump to 2 after counting to 8. Klein turned his body and saw Ciadas's figure, but he no longer had the intention of communicating with her. The real Mobet and Ciadas were already dead. The ones living in the book world were just two characters. Standing up and leaving the bar, Klein came to a nearby deserted alley. He planned on confirming the kind of spirit world this world had. He quickly outlined spherical lights in his mind as his thoughts gradually emptied out and his body and mind became tranquil. As his spirituality spread out bit by bit, several indescribable illusory figures appeared around him. However, up high in the sky, it lacked the 7 lustrous brilliances of different colors that contained endless knowledge. The 7 lights don't exist here. The number of spirit world creatures here are lacking. This place is indeed a fake spirit world created by the book. Klein took a step forward and found the colors in his vision saturate to the extreme as it overlapped with the obvious differences. He wasn't in a rush to explore the spirit world. He exited it and began window shopping through Pesot and chatted with others. Before long, he found Grozel's residence. The giant ran a blacksmith shop. He was taking an afternoon nap on a huge bed on the 2nd story. Klein directly entered by passing through the wall and came to Grozel's side. He observed the giant for a few seconds and took out the Nightmare Beyonder characteristic from his spirit body. With some difficulty, he used some of its powers that it came naturally equipped with. Deep, serene darkness quickly spread as it instantly enveloped Klein and Grozel. And in a spirit body state, Klein directly saw a blob of irregular hazy spherical light. His spirituality immediately emanated over and touched the spherical light. All sorts of scattered scenes instantly flashed past around him before fixating on a forest with towering but withered trees. On the other side of the forest was a mountain and steep cliffs. At the top of it was a magnificent palace. The palace was huge and opulent, and it didn't seem suitable for humans. It gave him the impression like it was from a myth as the light of dusk that scattered above it seemed frozen. Klein had seen this palace before. It was the giant king's court that had appeared in the dream world of the battlefield of the gods. However, this angle was completely different from before. He was situated behind the king's court. Klein turned his gaze to the forest where light could hardly penetrate through its denseness, having gained a rough idea of where he was. This was the waning forest which Grozel guarded when he was at the giant king's court. The trees in the forest were tens of meters tall, and the thickness of the trees was the arm span of several giants. However, their barks were mottled with signs of rot everywhere. The leaves and twigs were mostly withered and dropping as they interwove with each other like a dark cloud floating in midair. Grozel and similar-looking giants guarded the boundary of the forest, either carrying axes or broadswords, fully concentrating on defending the area. According to Grozel, this waning forest has the bodies of giant King Ormur's father and mother buried in it. Apart from this ancient god, no one else is allowed to step inside, including these guards. Yes, giant King Ormur's parents should be so-called original giants, the kind that was the craziest, cruelest, and most ferocious. Perhaps? Why would Grozel have such a dream? As Klein was in thought, he suddenly sensed something amiss. According to his random conversations in Pesot, the present Grozel was a native giant who had nothing to do with the giant king's court. Therefore, having such a dream made it appear rather abnormal. From the psychology alchemist's theory which Ma'am Daly and Miss Justice have discussed before, perhaps the book world will use or clone the original character's subconscious or collective subconscious when creating a character. Then, it would make minor changes, making the consciousness fulfill the required settings. Therefore, Grozel's dream will be influenced by his subconscious, reproducing life in the giant king's court. If that's the case, it can only be said that this book is a cruel author. The moment Klein thought of this, he suddenly had an idea. He felt that this was an opportunity for him to gather relevant information on the giant king's court. He previously planned on directly learning about such matters through Grozel. But in order to keep his promise, the giant guardian had died in the battle with King of the North Ulyssen. After his spirit body left the book world, it quickly dissipated without giving him any chance of communicating. Now, he finally had another method, which was to explore Grozel's dream. There had to be parts of it that were ridiculous or exaggerated, but the remaining content had to be a true reflection of reality. As long as an approach of careful study is employed, it's not impossible to distinguish the two. Grizel never entered the waning forest, so the scenes inside must stem from his imagination. There's no need to explore it. Klein slowly cast his gaze onto the mountain where the king's court was. It wasn't tall, which meant that the waning forest was on a mountain rather close to the king's court. It was probably just a straight path from there to the ancient god's residence. Klein didn't waste time searching as he walked straight to Grizel and acted like he knew him well. He asked in a relaxed tone, "How should I return to the king's court?" He knew that Grizel was an honest giant, and he would only be more honest in his dream. Grizel raised his hand to scratch the back of his head as he looked down with a confused look. He said with a smile, "Isn't it simply by taking the barren tunnel?" He pointed ahead and added, "You'll see it when you circle around that boulder." "Thank you," Klein sighed as he said with a bow. As he watched Klein depart, Grizel scratched the back of his head again, muttering to himself in confusion, "Who is he? Why do I find him so familiar?" After circling a boulder that protruded out the mountain, the scene opened up before Klein's eyes. A gigantic cave at least 30 meters tall appeared. Erected outside the cave was a stone stele. Engraved on it was a single vertical eye, a high nose, and plush lips. It looked like a giant's head had been squeezed in to reveal the frontal facial features. Just as Klein approached, the mouth on the stele opened. "Why are you returning to the king's court ahead of time?" "By His Majesty's orders," Klein said in an unflustered tone. After all, the intelligence level of all the living beings in this dream was equivalent to the owner of the dream, Grizel. The lips on the stele opened and closed as it let out a humming sound. "Please answer a question, otherwise, you shall not pass." "If only I brought along aurorareads, it should be rather fun to see what happens." Klein lampooned as he calmly nodded. "Okay." The stele's lips closed for 3 seconds before opening. "If your wife, daughter, and a woman you covet ask you to judge which of them is most beautiful, who would you choose?" This is completely different from the magic mirror style. Klein's lips quivered as his mind raced. Using nearly 10 seconds, he answered, "My intelligence is insufficient to determine this matter. I will assign someone who is more intelligent than me to give the answer." "How can I answer something that can get me killed?" He gritted his teeth as he added, "Who is this more intelligent person?" The giant's face on the stele froze for a few seconds. Klein solemnly answered, "Of course it's our king." The stele was shocked beyond words. It took quite a moment before it said, "All right, I'll consider it as you answering the question. You may pass." Klein immediately crossed the strange stele and walked into the cave. The ground in the cave was paved with large stone panels that had been weathered. The sides and top of the cave were filled with murals, speaking of stories of the giants and dragons battling the demonic wolves, mutants, devils, and phoenixes. The drawing style was crude and the color choice was dark. However, it was extremely vivid. Klein walked forward as he observed the murals. He discovered that there were swaths of withered weeds, as well as all kinds of coarse gravel in between the stone panels and the bottom of the murals. And the lack of water and the decline of life became more apparent the deeper he ventured inside. After walking for an unknown period of time, Klein saw a huge grayish-blue open door. Standing on each side of the door was a 4 to 5 meter tall giant. The giants guarding this place were different from Grizel and the others. They wore solid and beautiful iron-black armor and firm, exquisite helms. They looked like 2 huge statues. They didn't stop Klein and allowed him to pass through the door and enter the hall within. The hall wasn't too spacious. The ends of the hall could be seen clearly, and it could probably only hold 5 to 6 giants. As Klein was observing his environment, he suddenly halted. Then, the hall seemed to be pulled up by an invisible hand as it quickly rose. He staggered a little before finding his footing. All he saw were grayish-black walls flashing by as they kept sweeping downwards. In about 10 seconds, there was a thud as the hall stopped descending. At this moment, it wasn't the cave tunnel outside the door, but a magnificent palace propped up by stone columns. Klein briskly left the original hall as he sized up his surroundings with piqued interest. "This is the giant king's court's elevator? This seems to be the place where the guards live." Outside is a long table taller than humans, with extremely large chairs. On the two sides are rooms, and inside them are neatly ordered beds. Klein swept past the various items in the hall before he stopped at a mural. The mural's main character was a giant dressed in full-body silver armor. As there was nothing to scale, Klein was unable to know exactly how tall he was. The giant stood by the side of a cliff, with a sword in hand pointing diagonally upwards. His body emitted a bright halo, like a rising sun illuminating the surroundings. Many giants were genuflecting around him, as though praying or worshipping him and awaiting a bestowment. The giant king's son, god of dawn, Badheilbrunn? Klein looked at the face of the mural's main character in thought, and he saw that his face was blocked by a mask. There was only a dawn-like halo coming from his eyes. It's very similar to the god of combat statue in the Backland underground ruins. His face is completely hidden behind a mask. Queen Mystic said before that the god of combat is a giant who lived from ancient times. Therefore, their church's headquarters, the Great Twilight Hall, resembled the giant king's court. Could it be the son of the giant king? God of Dawn escaped the destruction of the king's court, and at a certain point in time, he managed to retake the authority wielded by his father. Klein made a bold guess, but he lacked any evidence or clues. He used the correspondence principle to look at the wall opposite the mural. There was also a mural there, but the main character was no longer God of Dawn, Badheilbrunn. Instead, it was a female giant in a leather vest and long skirt. This female giant stood sideways. Her facial contours were soft, and her single vertical eye was focused beneath her. Long, dark brown hair reached all the way to her back. Her right hand was spread out as she held items like wheat and fruits. Around her were golden fields, clear lakes, and trees covered with fruits and colorful mushrooms. Giant Queen, Goddess of Harvest, Omabella? Klein looked around, but he didn't see the mural representing Giant King Ormur. There's no depiction of the ancient god because this is the residence of remote guards? Then, going out from here will likely be the interior of the Giant King's court. Klein carefully walked to the door. He used the method he employed in the dream world of the battlefield ruins of the gods by activating creeping hunger and using the strength of a zombie to open the door. However, there wasn't a palace in the frozen dusk that he had imagined outside. Instead, it was a gray, hazy world. It appeared to be a cliff with a bottomless pit. According to Miss Justice's previous experience, this is likely the boundary of the dream. The only way is to head down and enter Grozel's subconscious. Finally, I'll arrive at the Sea of Collective Subconscious. Miss Justice discovered a mind dragon in the human Sea of Collective Subconscious where she was. Then, in this book world created by the Dragon of Imagination, what would be contained in the Sea of Collective Subconscious? Klein's mind whirred as he conjured a staircase that led down into the hazy world. The staircase didn't head straight down but spiraled around deep into the gray haze. The bottom couldn't be seen, nor were any of the details of the mind world that were possible to discern. After silently observing it for a few seconds, Klein walked forward as he got onto the staircase and carefully walked down it. The surrounding light gradually dimmed with a gray, hazy luster that enveloped the extremely silent world. The moment Klein proceeded down the staircase, he felt more and more like he was being locked inside a dark, silent room. Slowly, his ears could hear his sloshing blood and his beating heart. The latter sped up as it was invaded by panic and horror which he could hardly keep in check. Klein focused his mind as he imagined the stacks of spherical light so as to stabilize his emotions and recover. To his side, a grayish-white cliff coldly stood there, a representation of the domain of Grozel's consciousness. It was silent as though it were dead, but the surrounding grayness would occasionally coruscate. Klein focused his gaze and saw that in one of the points of light, there was a giant who ripped apart a human before stuffing it into his mouth, as well as Grozel panicking. Back then, the latter was less than 3 meters tall, and it was clearly still an adolescent. The point of light flashed past, appearing in the frozen dusk that scattered over the mountain peak. Time here seemed to become impeded. Klein was just about to seek out any valuable information in Grozel's subconscious when he suddenly heard sounds akin to a beast's panting. With a whoosh, a huge palm appeared from the surrounding haze. Its skin was grayish-blue and was covered with signs of rot. On it was an obvious yellowish-green liquid as it quickly grabbed at Klein's ankle. Amidst the panting sound, similar palms rose up one after another from the staircase below, as though they were attempting to forcibly pull Klein's spirit body into the mind world's darkest and most unfathomable zone. Instantly, these rotting palms formed a dense horse as they kept struggling upwards and let out sounds of horrible, hair-raising panting. It made Klein instinctively jump up 3 steps. However, the countless palms that belonged to giant corpses didn't stop. They squirmed along the staircase as they surged upwards, covering every inch of space. Klein was just about to reach out his right palm to draw Death Knell and use purifying bullets combined together with Death Knell's slaughter ability to finish off the countless monsters when 2 questions suddenly flashed in his mind. Where do these palms come from? Why would they be inside Grizel's subconscious? The moment this thought came to mind, his spiritual perception was triggered. Klein came to a realization as he immediately abandoned his thoughts of using Death Knell. He calmed his breathing and imagined the spherical lights. The huge, rotting palms took this opportunity to reach his feet as they grabbed his calves and ankles. At that moment, they silently vanished as though they had never appeared. Indeed, this is an illusion created by Grizel's subconscious. Here, minds don't just face each other, but they interact with them as well. If one lacks the corresponding beyonder powers, the deeper one goes, the easier it is to have an emotional breakdown. Intrusion by the other party's subconscious will slowly happen until one's beyonder powers are severely tainted. As a result, one will become a mental patient that will never be able to recover their rationality, and this might very well lead to a loss of control. This is different from communicating with spirits. Corruption isn't avoided simply by maintaining lucidity and reason. This is because one is already inside the target's beyonder powers. Klein muttered to himself, having figured out something. He hesitated for a few seconds before turning around to climb back up the stairs. He gave up on venturing deep into Grizel's mind world because he lacked the beyonder powers to placate his own mind. Insisting on heading down was equivalent to suicide. I'll consider exploring again after I find a mystical item that targets this aspect. Klein determined his thoughts as he walked faster. Finally, with a leap, he returned to Grizel's dreamscape and returned to the guard's quarters in the giant king's court. He already felt exhausted, so he immediately left the dream, walking out of Grizel's blacksmith through the walls before observing the wonders of the book world. I've already met Grizel, Mobit, and Ciadas. And while I was casually chatting with others, I also heard of the devout priest, Snowman, and the philosopher, Frunzier. However, there isn't an Anderson Hood, Edwina Edwards, Danitz, or Gehrman Sparrow. Therefore, only the dead will possess brand new characters in the book. Or could it be that only those who had stayed in here for extended periods of time, fully expressing themselves as an adventurer in their day-to-day lives, would be able to have their subconscious replicated? As Klein strolled by the side of the street which was illuminated by the setting sun, he considered something that he found crucial. If it were the former theory, where the dead would revive and become new characters, then there was nothing Klein needed to worry about. However, if it was the latter, he had to consider reducing the frequency at which he explored the book, as well as strictly control the amount of time he spent in it each time. There's no way to ascertain it for now. I'll deal with the situation by assuming it's the latter. There's definitely nothing wrong with being cautious. Klein quickly made up his mind and was about to return above the grey fog. At that moment, he saw another familiar figure. Frunzier, with his black hair and blue eyes, was sitting on a long, wooden chair by the street. He was staring blankly at the sky which seemed to be alit in flames, as though he was in thought. Recalling how this lone soldier's ash urn was still with him, he planned on sending it back to the Church of Storms cemetery in Backland. Klein silently sighed and walked over before sitting beside him. He asked as though it was a casual conversation, "What's on your mind?" "I'm wondering who I am, where I come from, how I should return." Frunzier didn't look away as he said in a dreamlike state. Without waiting for Klein to ask another question, he shook his head with a chuckle. "I ultimately feel that I don't belong here. I'm not myself at the moment, and that there's some place awaiting my return. They always mock me for considering such pointless questions, so they gave me the title of Philosopher. As he spoke, he looked at the setting sun and once again fell into silence and looked spellbound. Klein didn't say a word. He sat there quietly and accompanied Frunzier in watching the sunset. Finally, he silently vanished. Frunzier didn't notice that the person beside him had already left. He sat there motionless like a marble statue, looking far into the distance. After replenishing the ship's supplies, Alger Wilson instructed the Blue Avenger to leave the Resistance's private harbor. It wasn't going to stay too long in the Rorstad archipelago. He had to return to Pasu Island to make his report by the designated time. At that moment, in the captain's cabin, he was watching in anticipation at the illusory door that was formed by items with spirituality and a burgeoning flame. It was the door of sacrifice, and it was also a door of bestowment. Amidst an illusory creaking sound, the mysterious door slowly opened, revealing an infinite depth and darkness within its interior. Light shot out from within before converging immediately. After everything calmed down, 2 items had appeared on the altar at some point in time. As for the door with all kinds of strange symbols, it was gone. Alger was able to compose himself as he seriously thanked Mr. Fool. He finished the ritual according to the procedure before reaching out to pick up the 2 items. One of them was a piece of paper that had been neatly folded, while the other was a translucent jellyfish that had azure blue seawater in it. Alger inspected the latter and discovered that there were occasional vortexes formed by winds or occasional lightning streaks. And from time to time, he could hear a distant, moving voice sounding from it. This voice sounds like a woman's. From the looks of it, this characteristic's owner was a lady. Alger couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. This meant that it wasn't some quasi-high-ranking member of the Church of Storms that had been killed. The Church of Storms didn't have any female high-ranking members, quasi or not. Putting away the ocean songster's beyonder characteristic, Alger unfolded the piece of paper. He swept past the main ingredient, and he quickly looked at the supplementary ingredients. Finally, his eyes paused at the ritual. To him, the main ingredients were unimportant with a beyonder characteristic in hand. He could look at it later. As for supplementary ingredients, they were rather easy to find, so they didn't need much attention. It was the ritual that was of utmost importance. Drink the potion in an Obninsk's belly. Alger silently read the ritual's contents as the corresponding information quickly surfaced in his mind. Obninsks were ancient sea monsters. They could directly devour a sailboat, and it had a humongous, distorted body. It had as many as 3 heads and many tentacles that entangled with each other. They were the protagonists in many legends at sea. Most of these sea monsters were tamed by the Church of Storms. They had a fixed region of activity, but it was unknown if they had near-human intelligence. It's no wonder the Church controls Obninsks, and not other sea monsters. It's no wonder there are so many beyonders in the sailor pathway among pirates, but only a few can reach Sequence 5. Either they directly inherited it, or they're the subordinates of King of the 5 Seas or Queen Mystic. Then, where should I find Obninsks that don't belong to the Church? Alger frowned slightly as he contemplated his advancement that bypassed the Church of Storms. His first reaction was to find Queen Mystic Bernadette through Admiral of Stars Catlia. From her, he could find Obninsks that didn't belong to the Church of Storms. His second reaction was that it exposed himself to danger. This was because the corresponding Obninsks were likely servants of Queen Mystic, and they would report everything to their mistress. Yes, this will be the last resort if there aren't any other choices. Alger's thoughts raced as he quickly had another idea. That was to pray to Mr. Fool. This reawakened existence secretly wielded the former authority of sea god Calvetua. He could commandeer undersea creatures, allowing him to know where to find Obninsks that didn't belong to any faction. There's no need to rush it. If I were to advance now, I won't be able to hide the advancement from others, because of my lack of control over the spirituality dissipation. I can perform the prayer after I make my report and leave Pasu Island. Alger calmed down and memorized the ocean songster formula. Then, he moved the piece of paper to the tip of the candle's flame. As he watched the flame devour the formula at an increasing speed, Alger's gaze turned deep. After finishing off the remnant traces, his gaze landed on a sea map and locked onto a location. Bansi. Alger had planned on making a trip to Bansi in passing while en route to Pasu Island. He wanted to know what the present state of the harbor was. He had already shared his thoughts with his sailors, and no one objected. This was because they were equally curious as to why Bansi Harbor was suddenly destroyed. They were curious what it had turned into.